Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Eilish Poe. The story begins in 2018 when Eilish met a man named Jonathan Crossley. They spent the summer together, meeting at mutual friends' parties. While they didn't fall in love right away, they developed a strong friendship based on their shared interests, as they were both teachers. However, as the summer ended, their paths diverged. Jonathan was preparing to leave for Spain to teach and become a professor, while Eilish was teaching third grade in Fort Collins, Colorado, in 2020. Jonathan ended his teaching career in Spain and returned to Colorado after coming home. He reconnected with his friend Eilish. Their relationship quickly developed into a romantic one from the beginning. Jonathan wanted a serious relationship with her, but Eilish did not see it that way. She was honest about her feelings, expressing that she preferred a casual relationship without a serious commitment. Jonathan agreed to her terms, but he hoped to change her mind over the next few months. He tried various strategies to win her over and control her. Jonathan became aggressive and often caused trouble over trivial matters, both with her and her friends. By the end of the summer, Eilish was exhausted and decided it was time to end their toxic relationship. His constant declarations of love and obsession were too much to bear, and he was unable to convince her to continue their romantic relationship. However, Eilish did not want to hurt him and was concerned about finding a gentle way to break up. Eilish gathered the courage to tell him that they needed to break up before he became too attached. Jonathan was furious when he heard this. After the breakup, he continued to show up at her house with surprise gifts like chocolates and flowers, and he kept sending her messages expressing his love in various creative ways. Despite still having feelings for him, she decided to end the relationship. This choice marked a turning point for Jonathan. Instead of being loving, he became aggressive. When he realized she was no longer interested, he began to threaten Eilish. He repeatedly stated that he was deeply in love and could not let go of his feelings. Even mentioning murder, Eilish began to fear for her safety. But then, unexpectedly, Jonathan disappeared. He stopped calling and texting her every day, and the threats ceased, allowing Eilish to relax. However, her relief did not last long. A few months later, on November 3, 2022, Jonathan contacted her again, expressing his desire to reconcile. Eilish, still steadfastly rejecting him, confided in her loved ones about her ex-boyfriend's annoying obsession, trying to understand why he couldn't move on without her. On November 4, Eilish returned home from work. She left her things behind and found the basement door open. Although it seemed unusual, she wasn't worried, so she just closed the door. Eilish was tired from a busy day, which included tutoring an 8-year-old girl. In addition to her regular job, she changed into her flamingo pajamas, ready to relax. But first, she needed to clean her pet rabbit's cage. To do that, she went down to the basement to get some fresh bedding. As soon as she walked down the stairs, Eilish heard rustling behind her, and suddenly, she was attacked by Jonathan before she could turn around to see what the noise was. Jonathan had tried to make peace the day before, but was rebuffed, and now he was back for revenge. He had come to her house with the intention of attacking. He had spent about 26 hours at her house. Waiting for the right moment to strike, he broke in by shattering a small window on the first floor. Without being detected, Jonathan had prepared himself well, waiting for the right moment to execute his plan. He brought a backpack with a sandwich and water to keep his energy up. He even brought some of his favorite books to read while he waited in the basement. He was in the house even while Eilish and her friend were sleeping. From the basement, he sent a text message expressing his love. He wandered around the house while she slept, possibly watching her rest while planning a violent act. He did not attack immediately because Eilish's friend was in the next room. Jonathan spent more than a day in Eilish's house, watching many videos online. He specifically selected and rewatched the most gruesome scenes from his favorite horror movies. Eilish was caught off guard when she went into the basement, and Jonathan suddenly attacked her from behind. He first tried to strangle her, and Eilish struggled to fight back. He slammed her head against the wall, causing her to lose her balance and fall to the floor. Then he pulled out a knife. Eilish screamed for help, trying to use her phone to automatically call her roommate, but it didn't work. They lived together to save money, and Jonathan knew this. So he timed his attack to ensure that her roommate wasn't home. Jonathan hit Eilish multiple times, realizing her only chance of escape was to disarm him and fight back. She instinctively grabbed the knife, which caused her to be severely injured. Suddenly, Eilish remembered a technique she had seen in a documentary. When an animal is attacked, it sometimes pretends to be dead to survive. After another stab, she pretended to be unconscious and fell to the floor. Jonathan then delivered a final blow to her collarbone and continued to attack her. Remarkably, Eilish remained calm and, despite being in a lot of pain, tried to pretend that she was dead. After seeing her motionless, he knelt down in front of her, observing her for a few seconds. But she could only see him with half-open eyes, showing no emotion. After a while, Jonathan quietly got up and left. When she confirmed that the killer had left, she tried to reach for her cell phone, but she was unable to do so. Because of the severity of her injuries, Eilish knew every second counted, but she couldn't muster the strength to get up and find her phone. Suddenly, she saw ghosts appearing in front of her. Despite the shock and pain, she noticed glowing figures standing at the bathroom door just a few meters away. These were Eilish's deceased loved ones. The first ghost was her grandmother, who smiled and greeted her warmly. Eilish felt extremely happy to see her grandmother, as she never had the chance to say goodbye when she was alive before her death. Her grandmother had struggled with back problems and walked with a hunched back. But now, at the door, her grandmother stood straight and tall before disappearing after a few seconds. The next ghost was her friend Vika. Vika looked as if she were still alive. Her long hair was tied back with an elastic band, and she was wearing a green sweatshirt and a necklace. A genuine smile spread across her face as she watched the dying Eilish. The third ghost appeared. It was Alice, who had been murdered at the age of 32 by her ex-boyfriend in broad daylight. Alice began to push air with her hands, and at that moment, Eilish had a profound experience. She felt waves of energy flowing through her body. Believing that this supernatural help had granted her precious seconds to save herself as she tried to sit up, she realized that her cell phone was in her pajama pocket. She struggled to pull it out. Luckily, her phone fell out and landed on her back. She tried to use all her remaining strength and fading consciousness to press the emergency call button, but the touchscreen wouldn't work because her fingers were covered in blood. She could barely move the phone in her hand. So she lowered her face to the screen, using her nose to press the button and then the speaker key. The dying Eilish felt a huge sense of relief when the beeping was replaced by the voice of the police. She struggled to provide her address. In pain, she revealed that her ex-boyfriend had assaulted her in a weak voice. She urged the police to come to her rescue quickly after locating her. The police arrived 2 minutes later and found her still alive. The officers then discovered 16 stab wounds to her neck, chest, and arms. She was in critical condition and needed immediate medical attention. Despite her condition, the victim was able to name her attacker, Jonathan Crossley. Her fight for life continued. The ambulance arrived just 5 minutes after the police, while the paramedics worked to save her. The police began searching for Jonathan after attacking Eilish. He had disappeared. The police tracked his phone calls and located him using Jeep, revealing that he was driving toward the mountains in a rental car. He had rented the car a few days before the attack to avoid detection. The rental car traveled to the suburb of Lori, where patrol officers found it abandoned near a mountain trail. Following the trail, they found footprints leading to a 150-meter-high cliff overlooking the area and the city. However, Jonathan did not come to admire the view. His body was discovered at the bottom of the cliff. His actions resembled a scene from one of his favorite movies. He chose to end his own life after attacking Eilish. The police had access to Jonathan's cell phone, which provided them with valuable information. This allowed them to piece together a timeline of events that led to Jonathan committing this tragic act. The situation began to unfold a few weeks before the attack, when he ended his teaching career in Spain and returned to Colorado. Upon his return, he struggled to find work over the summer in this chaotic environment. The breakup with his girlfriend hit him particularly hard. He blamed himself for the breakup and became obsessed with her. He searched the internet for answers, looking for similar experiences to understand what he had done wrong and how he could mend their relationship. It became a subject of his research as he tried to win her back. His friends tried to reassure him that the breakup was a normal part of life and that he should accept what had happened and move on without blaming himself. Jonathan confided in his closest friends about his feelings and frustrations. This feeling of being trapped gradually pushed him toward a tragic solution to escape his problems. He considered harming Eilish and then taking his own life. Eilish, who survived the attack, attributes her survival to the influence of the spirits of the deceased. She believes that without their support, she would not have been able to seek help to this day. Eilish is doing everything she can to get her life back on track, and she remains determined. Eilish has undergone at least 12 surgeries before she was able to return to teaching. Despite all the challenges she has faced, she remains optimistic and continues to believe in a brighter future after her recovery. Eilish shared her supernatural story in detail, although she was hesitant to talk about it with strangers. She confided in her friends. Many of her loved ones believed that it was just a hallucination created by her mind while she was in a state of shock, as she had come so close to death. However, this could not be conclusively proven or disproven. 3 years later, when Eilish met with the media to recount her incredible experience, she became even more convinced that she had indeed encountered something otherworldly. Eilish has faced criticism many times, but she did not pay attention because she was alone in the basement that night. She claims that she was fully conscious during the attack, according to Eilish. The experience had a profound impact on her life. After her near-death experience in the basement, she began to see ghosts. After leaving the hospital, she frequently saw her deceased relatives and friends. She recounted that she learned about Jonathan's death not from the police but while she was lying in her hospital bed. During this time, she also saw a shadow that resembled him. Eilish tried to interact with these ghosts many times, but whenever she approached them, they disappeared. However, a few months after she left the hospital, while sitting in her car and preparing to start the engine, she heard 3 knocks on the window. When she turned around, she saw a shadow in the back seat. Upon reflection, she realized the shadow was her therapist, a middle-aged woman who smiled before disappearing. Eilish dismissed claims that this was the result of post-traumatic stress. She believes that the near-death experience helped her discover her paranormal abilities and convinced her that ghosts exist. It was her brush with death that allowed her to see them. After the attack, she struggled with the psychological effects and eventually returned to the scene of the crime, where she almost lost her life. To her, the basement felt cold. She later brought friends and acquaintances there, many of whom also felt the heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Eilish has also demonstrated psychic abilities on several occasions. She sensed Jonathan's death before the police found his body. She knew he was dead and alerted the police to his location. She also predicted that a colleague at work would give birth. She shared that sometimes she felt a strong energy from antiques, which could be so overwhelming that it made her feel nauseous. In the interview, she revealed that Jonathan continued to haunt her even after his death. After she was discharged from the hospital, she dreamed of him almost every day. In these dreams, Jonathan just stood in front of her, looking at her with the same cold eyes he had the day he decided to kill her. One day, she asked him why he did it. Jonathan's ghost replied that it was because of unrequited love. He still loved her, and always would. Jonathan could not let her go or allow her to belong to someone else. After being discharged from the hospital, Eilish's father often stayed with her overnight to help her feel safer. He mentioned that on the nights she dreamed of Jonathan, he had similar dreams as well, and they would share their experiences in the morning. During the interview, Eilish shared that she was gradually learning to cope with the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, she noted that the more she fought against these challenges, the fewer hallucinations of ghosts she experienced. However, she still needed support from the hospital for a while. A support fund was set up for her, which had raised over $66 by the time of the interview with the media. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sheila Von Wees. Sheila Von Wees was born into a loving and respectful family. However, as she grew older, she struggled to instill these values in her daughter, who became stubborn and disobedient, eventually leading to tragedy. On June 10, 1952, Neil Wees and Liz Lenore Allen welcomed their daughter, Sheila. Neil was a World War I veteran who had served in the United States Air Force, and Liz worked as an accountant. The couple had 3 children, Sheila, Bill, and Deborah, and they lived in Minneapolis. Sheila did very well in school and was an excellent student. She then went to Boston University, graduating with a master's degree in political science. After graduation, she worked at a publishing house, where she interacted with several famous people. One day, Sheila met James Mack, a well-known conductor, composer, producer, and arranger in the music industry. At that time, James had children from a previous marriage. But this did not stop him from starting a romantic relationship with Sheila. Their relationship quickly advanced, and they soon got married. After the wedding, the couple moved to a small town in the district of Foran. There, they got involved in community activities and even organized performances in their backyard. In October 1995, her daughter Lois Heather Mack was born. At 43, Sheila was overjoyed to welcome a healthy baby girl. She and her husband, James, showered Lois with love and enrolled her in a top preschool and school. However, some relatives felt that Sheila spoiled her daughter. In 2001, Sheila and James planned a vacation and bought tickets for a Mediterranean cruise, they taking Lois along. Sadly, during the trip, James suffered a serious leg injury that was not properly treated, resulting in partial paralysis. The family later filed a lawsuit against the cruise company for damages, but the legal process took more than 9 years to resolve. On July 20, 2006, the family went on a trip to Athens, where James later died in their hotel room. His death was recorded on August 6, 2006. After his death, James Maxwell was revealed, stating that his daughter Lois, Heather, would inherit $1.5 million. The relationship between Sheila and Lois was strained. Lois often displayed disruptive behavior, throwing tantrums, and even attacking her mother. Since 2008, police reports have documented 35 incidents of domestic violence in Sheila's household. Additionally, Lois often ran away from home, prompting Sheila to file a missing persons report. Friends of Sheila's have reported that she sought help from various psychologists to deal with the situation. During this challenging period, Lois was a middle school student at Oak Park and River Forest School, where her talent for dancing started to show. She generally behaved well in school, but discussions about her relationship with her mother would often lead to her becoming upset. At that time, she was dating a boy named Tommy Schaefer, who was 2 years older than her. Tommy had a history of legal issues due to minor offenses. Tommy had many friends. He was especially close to his cousin Robert Bibbs. In 2011, Sheila's family's lawsuit after James injured his leg on a cruise was settled, resulting in a court judgment awarding her family $340,000 in damages. Since James had died, the money was supposed to go to Lois as stated in his will. However, for reasons that are unclear, the judge ordered the money to be sent to Sheila, which increased the conflict between Lois and Sheila. Her resentment towards her mother grew, and she made numerous threats against Sheila. By 2013, Sheila, concerned for her safety, hired a private investigator because Lois had begun to stalk her, closely monitoring her routes, schedules, and daily routines. There was animosity between them, which made their trip to the Greek coast seem unusual. However, nothing catastrophic happened during that time. In 2014, Tommy and Lois began seeing each other more frequently. Despite Sheila's objections, the situation escalated when Lois stole Sheila's bank card at a hotel party and spent over $1,000. Her mother threatened to report Lois to the police, blaming her for many problems, including the death of her father James. Tensions rose, leading Lois and Tommy to consider a drastic solution to their problems, as Sheila was seen as an obstacle to accessing the family's finances. Despite their strained relationship, Sheila and Lois traveled to Bali together in August 2014. The mother hopes that during her 10 days here, her daughter will reconsider her feelings and stop resenting her. They stayed at the St. Regis Hotel in Bali. On the day they arrived in Bali, Lois texted Tommy, confirming that everything was going according to plan. She then stole her mother's credit card again and bought a $12,000 ticket for Tommy. He arrived on the island just 12 hours later. Meanwhile, Lois was arguing with her mother at the hotel, this time about the news of her pregnancy. Tommy then went to the hotel where Sheila and Lois were staying and got involved in the fight. He hit Sheila in the face with a metal crowbar, killing her instantly. Tommy told his cousin Robert what had happened. Lois and Tommy then put Sheila's body in a suitcase and asked a porter to leave it in the hotel lobby while they called a taxi. The taxi arrived within 10 minutes and they quickly loaded the suitcase containing Sheila's body into the trunk to leave Bali as soon as possible. However, Sheila had previously warned the hotel staff not to accept any payments made with her card without her presence, knowing that Lois often stole her cards. As a result, Lois had no money and the couple were unable to pay for their hotel room. They fled without paying the bill, leaving their passports in the hotel safe. Without these documents, they cannot go to the airport. Lois and Tommy asked the taxi driver to stop at a budget hotel called Rita Valley, which they had just passed. They left their suitcases in the taxi and asked the driver to wait 10 to 15 minutes while they checked in. However, 2 hours had passed, and the driver became impatient and went into the hotel himself, but found their room empty. Lois and Tommy had checked in there but had quickly fled. Frustrated, the taxi driver returned to his car and noticed that the suitcase was leaking a red liquid. Suspecting foul play, he called the police. When the police arrived and opened the suitcase, they discovered Sheila's body inside. Forensic experts later concluded that she had died from facial fractures that had blocked her airway. In addition, her fingers were broken and her body was covered in bruises. The heartbreaking news of Sheila's death reached her family, prompting her sister, Deborah, to begin searching online for information about the case. All she found was a photograph of a suitcase. As details of the murder were reported in the media, public interest grew. Staff at the Rita Suitcase Hotel informed police that a young couple had checked in that night without luggage. When hotel staff asked them to provide their full names for internet use, they complied, knowing that this was required. The police were quick to obtain the couple's information. Police began to go to the room the couple was staying in. Hotel staff said the room had been searched and was empty. However, the couple had secretly returned to the room because they had nowhere else to go and were exhausted. They were sleeping when police found them. Lois and Tommy were taken to the police station for questioning. They gave conflicting stories about being attacked by a gang at the St. Regis Hotel and claimed that the robbers had killed Sheila. While the couple's testimony was inconsistent, the hotel staff and taxi driver remained consistent in their tests. As a result, Lois and Tommy were arrested for murder. Lois became angry, shouting that she was innocent and demanding a lawyer from the United States. The couple appeared on public television in Indonesia, with the report filmed from the police station. Tommy covered his face with a t-shirt, while Lois smiled and smoked a cigarette. They were then transferred to Lessenpar Prison, which houses serious criminals and murderers. Sheila's body was returned home for burial. Her case attracted international attention. During the proceedings, Lois underwent several psychological evaluations, but the results were not considered in the verdict. As the investigation progressed, police discovered more details about the case and the media reported that Lois was pregnant. Then on March 17, 2015, a baby girl named Stella was born. The police allowed Lois to see her baby, but only within the confines of the prison. The baby was healthy, but had an extra finger on his left hand that required surgery to remove. At the hearing, Tommy cried as he claimed that he was defending himself against an aggressive Sheila. He said that she attacked him when she found out about Lois's pregnancy. He also said that Lois often expressed a desire to escape her difficult mother. Lois' testimony contradicted Tommy's. She said she never wanted her mother to die. During the violent fight, she even ran into the bathroom to save her mother. But her testimony was not believed. The judge was presented with evidence that showed Lois and Tommy's criminal intent. Lois had previously suggested that Tommy hire a hitman to kill Sheila and had prepared $40,000 for the purpose. Sheila's autopsy showed obvious injuries and bruises on her hands and face, indicating that Sheila had fought back in self-defense. As a result, Lois Heather Mack and Tommy Schaefer were convicted of premeditated murder. Under Indonesian law, they faced the death penalty. However, the court pardoned them. This leniency was largely due to their newborn child and the couple's deep remorse. Tommy realized the severity of his actions. Sheila's family later visited him in prison, talked to him, and expressed their grief. This interaction caused Tommy to fall into a depression. He began to hate himself and truly regret his choices. His mental state deteriorated, leading to health problems, causing him to lose 11 kilograms and look pale. In April 2015, the final court hearing concluded, and the judge announced the verdict. Lois Heather Mack was sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Tommy Schaefer received an 18-year term. The prosecution described them as ruthless criminals. However, Tommy's good behavior and expressed remorse helped him avoid a longer sentence. As they left the courtroom, Lois posed for photographers from various newspapers and, while drinking a soda that smelled of alcohol, smiled and made jokes. The only thing that troubled her was the fact that she would be released much earlier than Tommy. Meanwhile, Tommy looked at her with anger and wanted nothing to do with her, marking the end of their relationship. Lois, who avoided the death penalty and received a shorter sentence, acted provocatively in prison. She frequently took photos and videos with her friends in prison, enjoying their time together. She managed to get alcohol to drink. To earn money to buy alcohol, she sold food in the prison yard. The prison authorities allowed her to sell food, feeling sorry for her because she was a single mother, but they saw that she did not care much for her daughter, who spent her early years in terrible conditions. Tommy considered Lois a fallen person and mentally ill. One day, reporters secretly entered the prison and recorded footage of Lois having fun and dancing with friends in her cell. The footage quickly went viral on television and online, causing considerable public outrage. In response, Tommy filed a petition with the United States government, requesting that Lois be transferred from the Indonesian prison to a psychiatric hospital in the United States. In the petition, he expressed that he was not seeking sympathy but hoped that their daughter would grow up to be a good person. A year later, Tommy wrote a letter to his friends detailing how Sheila's murder was planned and carried out, and Lois's questionable actions in front of their young daughter Stella. Lois seemed to be focused only on her own gain, with no regard for Stella. The responsibility of looking after Lois' daughter Stella was eventually given to a fellow prisoner, a Sharputa Melody Cert, who had been released. Ashar quickly adapted to life in Indonesia and married a wealthy local man. Stella was then placed in the care of the couple. The police identified Robert's involvement in Sheila's murder, leading to his quick arrest and trial in 2017. He pleaded guilty to breaking the law and being an accessory to Sheila's murder. During the trial, he revealed that in August 2014, Tommy had come to him for advice on how to carry out a murder. As a result, Robert received a 9-year prison sentence. Sheila's family was pleased with the outcome. While in prison, Lois ended her relationship with Tommy. In October 2021, Lois completed 7 years in an Indonesian prison and was paroled. Her reunion with her 6-year-old daughter, Stella, was a moment of liberation for her. Stella lived in Indonesia for another month before being extradited to the United States with her mother. At that point, her daughter no longer needed a guardian. Upon arriving in Chicago, Lois was arrested at the airport by FBI agents. She faced new charges of conspiracy to murder a U.S. citizen abroad and obstruction of justice. Lois attempted to draw media attention to her arrest, believing it was unfair, especially since she had already served time in Indonesia. She felt it was unfair that the police had brought new charges against her. At her first court appearance in the United States, Lois denied all charges against her. Her attorney, Keith Vogel-Barova, argued for her to be released on bail. In response, District Judge Charnell agreed to consider the appeal and heard from Assistant District Attorney Terry Keeney. The court needed a reasonable amount of time to make a decision. A week later, Lois reached a plea deal with police and pleaded guilty to conspiracy to murder a U.S. citizen abroad. A hearing then took place in Illinois federal court. District Judge Matthew Kelly considered the prosecution's recommendation for a 28-year prison sentence, minus 7 years for time served in Indonesia. The judge then sentenced Lois Heather Mack to 26 years in prison, ordered her to pay $2,278 in restitution, and fined her $50,000. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Diogo Goncalves. Albufeira, a beautiful resort town, is one of the most visited places in the Algarve region of southern Portugal. It was there, in 1999, that Diogo was born. He is the only child of a poor but hard-working family whose income mainly depended on the of tourism. Diogo's parents saw him as a good son, and those who knew him described him as decent, responsible, hard-working, and reliable. He was also a very outgoing young man who loved being surrounded by friends and family. Diogo went to high school in his hometown. After graduating, he started studying computer science. To fund his education and support his family, he got a job at McDonald's in 2015 when he was just 16. At 17, while still working there, his life became miserable when his father suffered a stroke and fell into a vegetative state, as reported by the media. That same year, while Diogo and his mother were dealing with his father's health crisis, another tragedy struck. His mother, who had always supported his learning and growth, was hit by a car on her way to work at the mall, where she cleaned. The car dragged her several meters, leading to her falling into a ditch where she died from her injuries. Although the driver fled, but the police identified him and he faced trial. While he was waiting for the conviction of the person responsible for his parents' suffering, Diogo needed to be transferred to a medical unit where he received the necessary care. His maternal aunt, worried about his situation, had suggested that he move in with her. However, they had a serious disagreement, and after a few weeks, it became impossible for them to continue living together. Diogo explained what was happening to his friend, who offered him a room in his house in the Aldea neighborhood, also in Albufeira. At the time, the closeness to the friend's relatives helped Diogo feel at home. Despite his young age, Diogo demonstrated great ability to handle and overcome difficult situations with patience and optimism. In 2017, at just 18 years old, Diogo graduated with a degree in computer technology and completed a 6-month internship at Villa Vita Park, a leading 5-star hotel. His impressive work led the executives to offer him a position as a technician. In 2018, Diogo accepted the offer and left his job at a fast food restaurant chain, where he had worked for nearly a year and had become a duty manager. This thing a new chapter in his life, filled with opportunities to advance after overcoming difficult times. After working at the company for some time and anticipating better days ahead, he decided to buy a car. Diogo got along well with his co-workers, especially Maria Malvero, a 19-year-old security guard at the hotel. Maria, like Diogo, comes from a family with difficult circumstances and faces her own challenges. Her mother had mental health issues, and her father left when she was very young. She never spoke to him again. Maria, interested in martial arts, practiced karate and aspired to be a police officer. However, her application to the police academy was rejected due to her tattoo. Disappointed, she decided to study at Securinfo, a company that trains security guards in various private security fields. Diogo was interested in Maria and made his feelings known from the start, but she did not feel the same way and treated him coldly. Fabio Acosta, a close friend of Diogo, said that Diogo was deeply in love with Maria. He was so infatuated that he declined a well-paying job offer from the Sheraton hotel chain in Lisbon because he didn't want to be away from her. Additionally, he would bring her meals when she was working. Over time, they became very close, and people around them assumed they were a couple. However, there was no romantic relationship between them. Maria told Diogo she didn't want anything to do with him because she had just ended a toxic relationship with a naval officer, yet she was still giving him false hopes. Diogo never gave up hope for a future with Maria and sought opportunities to be near her and make her happy in various ways. One day, he was deeply disappointed when he saw a video on social media of Maria kissing another girl. Diogo was upset because he believed she should have told him that she wasn't interested in men and that this was why they could never be together. Fabio, Diogo's best friend, tried to reassure him by saying that girls often do this, but Diogo was not convinced. He insisted that she had lied to him and that was why she had rejected him. Despite the disappointment, Diogo and Maria stayed friends, and she continued to accept his gifts and invitations for dates. Several times, Diogo offered to walk her home, but she always said her roommate had a jealous boyfriend and she didn't want to bring another man into the apartment. As time went on, in December 2019, Diogo learned that he would finally receive compensation for his mother's death, which had occurred 3 years earlier. After receiving the payment amount of up to €70,000, Diogo decided it was time to buy a house to avoid continuing to pay rent. He shared the good news with his friend Maria, who left her job at the hotel a few weeks later. Maria stated that she could no longer stand the colleagues' comments about the relationship between her and Diogo. She also explained that she wanted to spend more time with her mother, who needed a lot of attention due to a mental illness. At that moment, there was no reason to doubt her words. However, subsequent incidents suggest that her decision to leave the hotel was motivated by dark reasons, and this is where the third character in the story, Mariana Fonseca, 20 years old, comes in. Mariana worked as a nurse at the hospital and had a dear relationship with Maria. They both lived together in Mariana's parents' house, because they still do not have enough money to have their own home where they could enjoy their relationship. When Maria discovered the substantial amount of money Diogo, she started getting closer to he. It seems Maria shared this information with Mariana, and they decide to trick Diogo in order to gain access to his bank account and steal the compensation money. After Maria repeatedly refused to date Diogo, one day, she told him she wanted to spend a romantic evening with him. This was a significant surprise for Diogo, who was overjoyed and couldn't believe his luck. After waiting for so long, he was ecstatic about finally being with the girl he loved. They planned the meeting for Friday evening, March 20th, 2020. Diogo was thrilled and didn't question why Maria had suddenly changed her mind. Maria and Mariana had different accounts of the incident that day, but here are the facts according to media reports based on official information. When Diogo entered, Maria offered him some orange juice she had brought. However, the drink contained an unexpected ingredient, diindawomethane, DIM, a drug affecting the central nervous system, with analgesic and sedative properties. Maria using the drug, which she had stolen from the hospital. Her plan was to sedate Diogo, access his banking information, and manipulate his fingers to unlock his phone. Mariana waited in a car outside while Maria executed the plan. Mariana even texted she several times to check if the drug had taken effect, as it was taking longer than expected. The situation inside the house became increasingly more tense. Diogo didn't understand what was happening and started to feel anxious. Maria then tries to calm him down by promising to show him an erotic dance, but first she has to tie him to a table. After being restrained for a few minutes, Diogo panicked and asked Maria to release him, but she became aggressive, leading to a struggle. Using her martial arts skills, she subdued Diogo by knocking him to the floor and choking him, prevent him from breathing. According to Mariana's testimony, Maria later instructed her to enter the apartment. Upon entering, Mariana found Diogo on the floor. She questioned Maria about the incident and criticized her for going beyond their plans, which was to steal his keys and take his money. Seeing Diogo unresponsive, Mariana began resuscitation efforts. When he woke up, he was extremely agitated and attempted to attack She. It seems he realized that Mariana was plotting against him, led him to try to defend himself. In response to Diogo's aggression towards Mariana, Maria intervened by grabbing him from behind, bringing him to the ground, and restraining him by squeezing his neck again. Diogo's life ended tragically at the hands of the girl he loved, Maria. His body was found in the living room of Maria and Mariana's house, where they continued with their planned robbery. They first severed his thumb and index finger to unlock his phone, access a mobile payment app, and transfer money. This process took several days because there was a limit on the amount that could be transferred each day. When he learned that Diogo had work scheduled the next day, Mariana and Maria tried to prevent his colleagues from noticing his absence, searching for him, and reporting him missing. One of Diogo's colleagues received a text from his number stating that he couldn't make it to work that day and needed someone to cover for him. Diogo's colleague, who disliked last-minute shift changes, found the request odd. Diogo asked if everything was okay and received a simple yes in response. The conversation among Diogo's co-worker and others continued throughout Friday and part of Saturday, but the unusual messages increasingly seemed uncharacteristic of him. One person receiving these messages was Diogo's supervisor. One message said that Diogo wouldn't be returning to work because he had met a woman in France and planned to move in with her. This explanation seemed odd to the supervisor because Diogo was a responsible employee and wouldn't leave his job so abruptly. To find the answer, the supervisor attempted to call Diogo but received no answer. Later, he got a message stating that Diogo was not in to talk on the phone. The supervisor responded, saying he could only feel reassured if they spoke. He wanted to hear Diogo's voice and wanted to know what was happening. Diogo's loved ones reacted to messages sent by Maria and Mariana, in which they pretended to be Diogo. This prompted they to alter their plan for explaining Diogo's sudden disappearance. They decided to make it appear as if Diogo had ended his life and planned to dismember his body to get rid of the evidence. Maria later mentioned that their actions were inspired by the TV show Dexter, featuring a forensic scientist who killed criminals and disguised his crimes by dismembering their bodies. After executing their horrific plan, Mariana and Maria placed Diogo's body in trash bags in the trunk of their car. They then went to an ATM and shopped at a mall, where they were seen hugging and laughing on security cameras. Following this, they returned to Mariana's home to begin dismembering Diogo's body. Ultimately, they put Diogo's torso in a black bag and discarded the other parts in a container. Meanwhile, Diogo's friends launched a campaign to report him as missing and reached out to the authorities. The authorities then waited the required 48 hours before officially declaring him missing. Mariana and Maria left the house, with Maria getting into Diogo's car to drive to a cliff near the Cabo de São Vicente lighthouse. Mariana followed behind in her own car. Around 2 p.m. that day, Mariana threw Diogo's torso off the cliff and abandoned his car nearby. They planned to make it seem like he had jumped voluntarily. However, instead of falling into the sea, the remains got stuck on a rock. Finally, Mariana and Maria drove together in Mariana's car for about 12 minutes, covering 7 kilometers, to the Inferno Dago waterfall in Tavira, where they disposed of the rest of Diogo's body in the water. Shortly after, Diogo's car was discovered in a parking lot near the Cabo de São Vicente lighthouse. A newspaper report stated that 2 laptops were found inside the car, led forensic police to investigate. A land and sea search was launched, leading to the discovery of a young man's torso partially covered by a black garbage bag. Meanwhile, at another location along the coast, a French couple found the young man's head at Inferno Toigo. Diogo's hands and feet were later recovered during an intensive police search. The investigators assigned to the case found the details surrounding Diogo's death unusual. They noted that he was a quiet man who don't hang out with bad people. As the police continued their investigation, they discovered that Diogo had received a significant payout following his mother's death. While examining money orders, they found that a large sum had been transferred from Diogo's account to someone named Maria. Naturally, the detectives' next move was to locate Maria to understand why she had received money from Diogo. Maria attempted to persuade the police that she killed Diogo in self-defense, claiming he was trying to abuse her. She stated that this was why she had left the hotel prior to the incident. However, a review of the text messages between Diogo and Maria, they showed that her claims were false. After Maria stopped working, she and Diogo grew close. During her initial meeting with the police, Maria insisted that she was entirely responsible for planning and carrying out the incident that led to the shooting. Maria clarified that Mariana was not involved in the crime at all. However, Mariana's account of the incident contradicted what Maria's claimed. Mariana reported that Maria to wanting to steal Diogo's money and intended to kill him. She stated that Maria's plan was to make him suffer in order to extract his bank account password. Investigators gathered enough evidence to convict both girls, Mariana and Maria, including phone records, the Diogo's cell phone, and ATM surveillance footage. Maria and Mariana were arrested on April 1, 2020, and faced court in June of that year. The judge carefully reviewed the incidents that Maria described. Maria remained steadfast in her confession and denied any involvement Mariana's. She stated that Diogo's body was in a suitcase in a car parked in the garage for 2 days, and it was there that the dismemberment took place, while Mariana's family was sleeping. After hearing Maria's detailed testimony about the incidents, the judge repeatedly asked where Mariana was during the dismemberment, as which had been done with surgical precision at the joints. All attention in the courtroom turned to the nurse, Mariana. She anticipated the questions and clarified that, since everyone was aware of her employment at the hospital, they mistakenly thought she was responsible for dismembering the corpse. She said that dismemberment could easily be done by using information on the internet. The judge imposed a detention order on both Mariana and Maria, citing that they had committed a serious crime in a creepy, calculated, reckless, and extremely brutal manner. A few months later, on February 24, 2021, the trial began. During her testimony on February 26, 2021, Maria claimed that she initially wanted revenge on Diogo because he had abused her, but did not intend to kill him. She admitted that her goal was to humiliate him and clarified that Mariana had no relationship with Diogo. Mariana and Maria attended court together but did not make eye contact during the trial. It is rumored that after the arrest and subsequent jail time, they decided to end their friendship. The trial included testimonies from several witnesses, including forensic expert Teresa Costa. She explained that the level of diphenhydramine found in Diogo's blood was much lower than expected from the 3 ampoules, suggesting that he either did not take the prescribed dose or had taken it many hours before his death. On April 27, 2021, the court delivered its verdict. Maria Malvero was convicted of several serious crimes, including aggravated murder, destroy the body, robbery, unauthorized access, fraud, carjacking, and possession of an illegal weapon. As a result, she received a 25-year prison sentence and was ordered to pay €265,000 in compensation to Diogo's father. Mariana Fonseca, on the other hand, was acquitted of murder but found guilty of destroy the body, complicity, and fraud. She received a 4-year prison sentence but was released because none of her convictions required pre-trial detention, at least until the final sentencing. The court determined that Mariana's effort to save life Diogo indicated that she did not intend to kill him. The judge based his decision on a confession from she, in which she accepted full responsibility for her actions. However, this verdict was not accepted by the Portuguese public, who viewed Mariana as equally guilty of the serious crime against Diogo alongside Maria. After the verdict, Mariana exited the courtroom through a separate exit where her father, who had attended all the hearings, was waiting. Neither of them spoke to the media. Hey detectives. Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jessica Dishen. Jessica Dishen was born on May 2, 1982, in the small town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, USA. It was a quiet place where many residents made their living from farming and were very close to one another. Jessica had 2 younger brothers, Christopher and Michael. From a young age, she helped her parents, Mike and Edna, take care of them while they were at work. This made Jessica more independent, and her parents could always count on her. When she was 15, she started working part-time at a local restaurant, saving money to buy her first car. She dreamed of owning a red Pontiac, and after a few years, she had saved enough money to make this dream come true. Despite her part-time job, Jessica still achieved very good academic results and began planning to go to college to become an accountant. In the fall of 1999, when Jessica was 17, she entered her senior year and started dating a boy, which made her very excited. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, as usual, Jessica's parents went to work while she was still sleeping, and her younger brothers went to the bus stop and then to school. Jessica stayed home and was supposed to drive to school by herself. However, right after her brothers left, around noon, her mother, Edna, returned home and immediately noticed something strange. Jessica's car was parked in front of the house, even though she was supposed to be in class at that time. Edna went to Jessica's room, guessing that she might have overslept and not gone to school. However, Jessica was not in her bedroom. Edna then thought that, for some reason, Jessica might have asked her father, Mike, to drive her to school. She immediately called Mike, but he said he had gone to work alone that morning. Edna suspected that there was a problem with Jessica's car, so she took the spare key to try to start it. However, as she approached the car, she noticed a few disturbing things. The driver's door was slightly open. Jessica's cell phone was on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen, and under the front seat were a pair of shoes and her keys. In the back seat were her textbooks, work clothes, and purse. Edna immediately worried that the worst could have happened. It was clear that someone had tried to call 911 from Jessica's phone but couldn't get through. Furthermore, Jessica couldn't have left all her belongings in the car and left unexpectedly. Her family lived in the suburbs, so she would have had to walk several miles. Jessica's parents called the school and learned that she had missed class. However, the school did not notify them as they should have. A few hours later, Jessica's best friend from the place where they both worked called her parents, saying that Jessica had not shown up for her shift, which made them even more worried. Worried about Jessica's absence from school and work, as well as her belongings, including her phone with the 911 dial displayed being left in an unlocked car, her parents decided to call the police. However, the sheriff simply assumed that Jessica might have wandered off and would eventually return home. He did not notice that one of her shoes was left in the car, making it difficult for her to travel far without it. Jessica's parents tried to convince the sheriff that their daughter might be in danger, but despite their pleas, he refused to open an investigation, leaving them with no choice but to return home. After that, her parents took it upon themselves to search for her and contact acquaintances, but no one had any information about her. The next day, her parents returned to the sheriff and reported that Jessica had not returned home. This time, the police went to check Jessica's car but found another problem. The officers had searched the car without gloves, touching everything inside with their bare hands. They also did not follow standard procedure for checking Jessica's room. Jessica's parents, once again frustrated with the lack of professionalism from law enforcement, so sought the help of local media to draw attention to their daughter's disappearance and the police's lack of concern. Together with relatives and friends, they searched on their own and distributed flyers with information about Jessica. The search was led by Jessica's father and his brother, who were familiar with the area. Fearing the worst, they decided to search near a local river. The area had a bad reputation as it was dense, isolated, and popular with drug dealers and other criminals. For hours, Jessica's relatives searched the difficult terrain along the river but found no trace of her. The next morning, something unusual happened. Jessica's parents were at home, and their son was playing in the yard. Suddenly, the boy ran into the house, saying he heard a cry for help that sounded like his sister's. Jessica's father immediately grabbed the shotgun and ran outside to find the source of the cry. At the same time, his brother drove up to the house to join the search. Not long after, they noticed smoke coming from the property of their neighbor, a 40-year-old man named David Brooks. When they approached, they saw him burning something on the ground, which looked very suspicious. Jessica's father asked David for permission to search his farm. However, David refused and asked them to leave. It was not just David's strange behavior that was noteworthy. Before Jessica's disappearance, her family had maintained a normal relationship with David and his family. However, after Jessica went missing, David began to act strangely. He often drove slowly past Jessica's family's house and stared at them with a disturbing expression. Additionally, Jessica's parents received strange phone calls from a man who only panted without saying anything. Jessica's family suspected David might have had something to do with their daughter's disappearance, but they could not understand why he was behaving so oddly. Jessica's parents decided to contact the police again, despite having previously failed to get significant attention from the agency. They shared their observations, urged the officers to search David's property with dogs, and agreed to use Jessica's clothes to search for clues. The dogs led them to a fire pit on David's property, but they found no significant evidence. However, they did discover a pair of black gloves in one of the sheds, which indicated the presence of an odor associated with decomposition. Despite David's suspicious behavior, the police were still unable to connect him to Jessica's disappearance, and once again, they came up empty-handed. Frustrated with the local police, Jessica's father decided to contact the FBI. While the FBI typically did not investigate if only based on calls from relatives of missing persons, they decided to get involved immediately due to the disturbing facts presented by Jessica's parents. After a careful investigation, the FBI concluded that something truly terrible might have happened to Jessica. From this point on, A real investigation began, one that the local police had been reluctant to conduct. FBI agents collected fingerprints from Jessica's room and car, seized all potential evidence for analysis, and sent it to the lab. They also organized an extensive ground search using helicopters and gathered volunteers. Additionally, they thoroughly examined the bottom of the pond near Jessica's house, considering the possibility that her body might be there. FBI agents conducted a thorough search of David's farm and found a printed photo of Jessica. After this discovery, detectives were almost certain that David was involved in her disappearance. They also suspected his 35-year-old brother, Joseph, because he acted strangely while police were searching his property. Although investigators did not find enough evidence to arrest the brothers, they focused their efforts on thoroughly searching the area, as it was becoming increasingly likely that Jessica was no longer alive. On September 27, 17 days after Jessica went missing, police received a call from a woman driving along the road near where Jessica's father had been searching for her. The woman had seen a strange object near a tree on the side of the road and decided to check it out. The woman was shocked to discover it was a body. She immediately called the police. The FBI arrived at the scene and confirmed that the body was that of a young woman who was missing several fingers and toes. She had been bound with a rope that had traces of red and silver paint on her feet, and some of her clothing was also missing, suggesting that she had been sexually assaulted. Unfortunately, the state of decomposition of the body made it difficult to identify the victim. The police went to Jessica's home and asked her parents to assist in the identification process. Jessica's father was unable to look directly at body, but her mother agreed to do so. When she arrived at the scene, Edna initially could not identify her. However, Edna later noticed a small butterfly tattoo on the body that was identical to her daughter's and located in the same spot. Medical professionals later confirmed the deceased's identity as Jessica Dishon and determined that her cause of death was strangulation. Several bruises were also found on her body. The autopsy revealed that she had been alive for about 3 days after her disappearance, as her legs, arms, and fingers were still intact. This indicated that the police had a chance to save her, but they did not take any action to do so. After Jessica's body was discovered, the FBI decided to re-interview David. In the first interview, David claimed to have seen Jessica near her home on the morning she went missing. However, in a subsequent interview, he changed his story, stating that he had not seen her at all that day. He then claimed that he had been home in bed with his wife that morning. When detectives questioned David's wife, she contradicted his account. The FBI continued to question David, asking him what he would do if they found his fingerprints on the victim's body, even though no such evidence was discovered. David's response was suspicious. He said he would have to confess everything in that case. He subsequently failed a polygraph test, prompting the FBI to arrest him and proceed with trial. Although no solid evidence linked David to the murder, there were troubling circumstantial signs of his involvement, and the likelihood of a guilty verdict remained relatively low. Investigators continued to seek additional evidence as they prepared for trial. They recalled finding a rope similar to the one used to bind the victim's legs during a search of David's car. However, no DNA was found on it, making it an inconclusive piece of evidence. The trial began in January 2003, and David's attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to convict his client. During the investigation, authorities discovered several missing body parts of the victim near the scene. They placed the parts in special containers and turned them over to local police, provide the requirement to keep them in a refrigerator. However, they left the containers at room temperature, which caused the parts to decompose quickly. Because the DNA and other evidence against David were not strong enough and the jury could not reach a unanimous decision, he was released. Under state law, he could only be charged again if new evidence was found. For Jessica's parents, this was a devastating blow. They were almost certain that David was the culprit behind their daughter's death. Furthermore, if the police had taken their job more seriously, their daughter might have been saved. Ultimately, they lost all hope for justice. In the years that followed, the case remained unsolved and gradually faded from memory. In 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department. She was assigned to investigate cold cases, initially focusing on the murder of Jessica Dishon. When she reviewed the case files, she was shocked by the negligence of her predecessors. Most of the documents were filled with errors, lacked references to conversations with interested parties, and the evidence was not properly documented. The case had been handled so inefficiently that she had to start the investigation from scratch, although already 13 years after the murder. Lynn's first step was to contact Jessica's family. One of Jessica's brothers, now grown and living on his own, gave Lynn a box of Jessica's belongings that had been taken from her car. He had kept it since the police returned the items to the family. Lynn was once again confronted with her colleagues' poor handling of evidence, as it had not been properly stored. Although, after all these years, these items were unlikely to help her, she persisted in examining everything she could find. Through her research, she discovered information about David's medical examination results, which showed that his IQ was only 61, extremely low. This raised concerns about police operations, particularly regarding the questioning of him. Based on his significantly low IQ, he may not have fully understood the questions and may have given incomplete answers. This could indicate that he may not have been involved in the case, as his unusual behavior could be explained by his extremely low IQ. After a thorough investigation of everyone involved or living near the scene, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death, a colleague from another department called Lynn and shared new information from an inmate at the Kentucky State Prison who claimed to know the true identity of Jessica's killer. Lynn approached this lead with skepticism because, many times, when inmates try to provide information to the police, the end result is often frustration and wasted time. Many of them make up stories in hopes of getting released early or improving their prison conditions. However, she understood that this lead could not be ignored without verification. She visited the prison and met a man who was said to have relevant information. According to the man, he had shared a cell with a convicted child molester, the same crime as him. They became friends and exchanged details about their crimes. One day, the inmate told him that he had killed Jessica. The informant then revealing the man's name. It was Stanley Dish, Jessica's uncle and her father's younger brother. According to the informant, Stanley had confessed that he had sexually abused Jessica for years while they lived in the same household. Stanley had threatened to kill Jessica or her relatives if she spoke out. In the spring of 1999, when Jessica had a boyfriend, Stanley began to fear that she would eventually reveal her abuse by him. On the morning of September 10th, Stanley went to Jessica's home while she was alone. Jessica was getting into her car to leave when Stanley asked her to break up with her boyfriend. Jessica refused and threatened to report him if he did not leave her alone. When he refused, Stanley began to threaten Jessica. She tried to call 911, but Stanley grabbed her. Eventually, Jessica broke free and ran into the house. Stanley chased her down, beat her, then tied her up with bed sheets and took her to a nearby abandoned warehouse, where she was later found dead. Stanley held her captive for a long time, torturing and mentally abusing her before killing her. He then moved her body to a visible location near the road and buried it beneath the warehouse. He also claimed that after the murder, he had dismembered some of her body parts, hoping to deceive the police into thinking it was a drug deal gone wrong. Detective Lynn realized that information about the dismembered body parts had never been made public. Only Jessica's closest friends knew about it, so the informant could not have made this up. Finally, the man added that Stanley had buried Jessica's shoe under a broken tree near the shed. Lynn decided to verify all this information by searching for evidence. However, the local police station was short-staffed, so no one there could help her. She contacted Jessica's brother and a few other relatives, who agreed to join the search. She didn't tell them that Stanley might be the killer because she wanted to find some evidence to support these shocking accusations first. On the first day, they didn't find any clues in the heavy rain. They dug in areas that matched the description, but to no avail. The next day, Jessica's brother and Lynn returned to the scene. On the way, he showed her an abandoned shed on the side of the road. They went there and started digging inside, and almost immediately found a significant breakthrough. They discovered a buried bedsheet. Lynn collected this evidence and quickly went to Jessica's house. Over the years, Jessica's room had been kept exactly as it had been when her missing. Thanks to this, Lynn was able to confirm that the bedsheet found was part of Jessica's bedding, as it was not on the bed, and the other linens had the same pattern. Shortly after the evidence was discovered, Stanley was arrested and questioned. Although he appeared very nervous during the interrogation, he still refused to admit to the crime. He was eventually charged with murder, and the case went to trial. Jessica's father, Mike, could not believe that his own brother would commit such a cruel act against his daughter. He went through a period of complete denial but eventually accepted this unbearable truth. He recalled that in the early days of Jessica's disappearance, it was Stanley who suggested searching for the body near the riverbank. However, during the search, he suddenly felt nauseous and was taken home by his brother. It turned out that this incident occurred just a few hundred meters from the warehouse where Jessica lived, suggesting that Stanley had deliberately distracted them from searching for her while she was still alive. During the preparation for the trial, Detective Lynn carefully researched Stanley's past. She discovered that he had a previous conviction for assaulting another girl in the family. In addition, several other women reported that he had sexually abused them when they were children. He often took advantage of his relationship to stay at the victims' homes, then committed the crimes by threatening them not to speak out. The police concluded that he had committed these acts over a period of 3 decades. However, Detective Lynn found that securing a murder conviction would be difficult due to the lack of direct evidence such as fingerprints or DNA. She dug deeper into the case and stumbled upon an old box of files that had not been examined. When she looked through the contents, she was shocked again by the incompetence of those who had originally handled the case. The box contained a letter dated June 26, 2002, in which another informant had written to the police with the same story that Lynn had only heard 12 years later from a Kentucky inmate. In the summer of 2002, Stanley had been convicted of assaulting an underage relative. During that time, he had told a fellow inmate, who happened to be a police informant, about killing Jessica. The fellow inmate had written a letter to the department handling the case, revealing the gruesome details of what Stanley had done to his niece. The police simply ignored the letter and, perhaps believing that David had been involved all those years ago, did not consider other suspects. Lynn was frustrated by the lack of professionalism from her colleagues. Had they paid more attention to their work, the case might have been solved in 2002. For years, Jessica's family could only wait for the trial, hoping that Stanley would finally face the justice that had been delayed for his actions. The case began in 2015, and Stanley proclaimed his innocence. In court, Jessica's parents could barely look at the relative who had destroyed their lives. They were also furious that he would not admit to his actions to help them gain closure. The prosecution was concerned that the chances of securing a conviction for murder were slim, mainly due to the lack of substantial evidence. They were also worried about the charges of assault against the other girls in the family, as these witnesses would have to come to court and describe Stanley's behavior toward them in detail. To clarify, the prosecutor negotiated a plea deal with Stanley. Under the terms of the deal, the death penalty would be waived if Stanley pleaded guilty to the assault on his relative and to Jessica's murder. Stanley agreed to the deal, however. Part of the agreement stipulated that he did not have to reveal any further details about the crime. Jessica's parents were unhappy about this, as they wanted to know the whole truth. In the end, Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Stanley was sentenced at the age of 56 and could have been released at the age of 71. After the trial, Jessica's father stated that if his brother hadn't died in prison, he would have waited for him to figure things out for himself. In 2019, Stanley gave his first interview and insisted that he did not kill Jessica. He claimed he was on his way to work that morning, but 2 decades later, he couldn't prove it. He could not explain why 2 independent informants had similar stories, including details only the killer would know, such as where the bedsheets were buried. David Brooks stated that police had not ruled out his involvement in the case. Stanley, who knew him, may have asked for his help in disposing of the victim's belongings. Due to his low IQ, Brooks may not have understood the full extent of the situation. It is possible that he burned Jessica's clothes in a fire, and that Stanley gave him gloves that had a scent detectable by dogs. However, the truth may never be revealed, as Brooks passed away in 2021 due to heart problems. On the 3rd day after Jessica went missing, her younger brother heard screams outside and thought it was his sister calling for help. However, it is impossible to say for certain what happened at that time. Jessica could still be alive, but Stanley might have kept her in a shed a few miles from her home. In this case, it is more likely that the child imagined the incident due to stress or that someone else was screaming. However, there is another theory, although it seems unlikely. We know that shortly after Jessica's father rushed out, Stanley drove up to the house, which indicates he was nearby. Therefore, it is possible that the girl was in his car with her mouth covered or unconscious. In spite of this hypothesis appears very unlikely. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Kristin Smart. Kristin Denise Smart was born on February 20, 1977, in Augsburg, Bavaria, West Germany. She was raised by her parents, Stan and Denise Smart. When she was young, the family moved to Stockton, California. She is the oldest of 3 children. Kristin's mother, Denise, often called her a dreamer. Kristin loved the ocean and had an adventurous spirit. She was truly passionate about experiencing life. Kristin graduated from Lincoln High School in Stockton in 1995. Before college, she worked as a lifeguard and a summer camp counselor at Camp Mokulea in Hawaii. In 1996, Kristin enrolled at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California. She was ambitious but indecisive. Kristin initially enrolled at Cal Poly to study architecture because she loved to draw, but later changed her major to communication studies. Denise said that Kristin wanted to travel the world as a reporter. On Memorial Day weekend in 1996, Kristin called home and left a voicemail, "Good news, good news. I'll call home Sunday." Kristin was in regular contact with her family every Sunday. That day, Kristin had attended an off-campus birthday party that Friday night. Her friend, Margarita Campos, recalled taking her there. Margarita said Kristin seemed a little upset that Margarita couldn't join her that night. Margarita's last words to Kristin were to be careful. Kristin was wearing a gray cropped t-shirt, black shorts, and red Puma sneakers. As the party was winding down, at 2 a.m., classmate Tim Davis found Kristin unconscious on the grass nearby. He and another classmate and acquaintance of Kristin's, Cheryl Anderson, helped her walk back to the school dormitory. Paul Florist then approached Kristin and offered to help her get back to her dorm, saying he was leaving the party. Paul, Kristin, and Cheryl returned to campus, and since Davis lived off campus, he could not accompany them. Once the 3 of them were alone, Cheryl began to notice Paul's strange behavior. She noticed the many unexpected stops along the way and the way he interacted with Kristin. While walking, Paul would frequently hold Kristin around the waist, and Kristin would also wrap her arms around his neck. This made Cheryl even more curious, especially when Paul suggested that Cheryl walk ahead while he and Kristin tried to catch up. Cheryl eventually went her own way, but not before reminding Paul to make sure Kristin returned safely. Paul claimed that he had dropped Kristin off at the intersection of the hallways leading to both of their dorms. It was around 2:30 a.m. on May 25, 1996. Kristin Smart was never seen again. When Sunday passed without a call from Kristin, Kristin's roommates and neighbors thought something was wrong. They contacted the university police department to report Kristin missing, but no report was filed. Concerned, they called Kristin's family and the San Luis Obispo Police Department. 5 days after Kristin went missing, Paul was interviewed by UPD investigators. Paul said that the two had gone their separate ways at the intersection. However, investigators quickly noticed Paul's black eye. When asked about it, Paul explained that he had injured it during a basketball game. But a friend later disputed this story, stating that Paul's black eye had appeared before the basketball game. Paul told the friend that he didn't know how he got the black eye, he just woke up with it. A month later, Paul was interviewed again and confessed that he had lied about the black eye incident. This time, Paul said that he had hit his eye on the steering wheel of a truck. However, when questioned further, Paul admitted that this story didn't make sense either. He said he was in the truck at about 2 a.m. on May 27, 1996, and was installing a car radio because he was selling the truck. A search for Kristin began. Search dogs were used on June 29, 1996. For dogs trained to search for human remains were used individually to search for clues at the dormitory. Santa Lucia Hall. Each dog was sent to room 128, Paul Flores' room. The dogs showed no interest in the room, except for the corner of a mattress. Dog handler Carta Adela Morris said the dogs can detect the slightest physiological changes. During the search, their reactions suggested a high probability that there was a body in room 128. Another handler also recalled her dog's behavior while searching room 128. The dog searched the left side of the room several times, and Tori's behavior and strong reactions suggested that she had picked up the scent of something, but was still searching for its source. Although Paul Flores remained the prime suspect, no formal charges were ever filed. During that time, Paul Flores continued to live his life freely, although he was suspected by the police. From 1996 to 2007, the investigation continued, and searches were conducted at every possible location, including 4 properties owned by the Flores family. However, none of these searches yielded positive results. On the advice of his attorney, Paul Flores decided not to answer any questions by exercising his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. A person who invokes this provision has the right to remain silent and is not required to provide information that could incriminate them. During his 1997 deposition, Paul exercised this right and remained silent. This made it difficult for investigators, especially attorney James R. Murphy, as they were unable to find any new leads. Despite the overwhelming evidence linking Paul to the case, former Sheriff Ed Williams also admitted that he did not see a way to close the case. Paul's silence frustrated the authorities. The Smart family filed a wrongful death lawsuit for Kristin. However, the court decided not to proceed with charges. Kristin's case remains under criminal investigation. Paul and his family have refused to publicly address Kristin's case or the allegations against them. A roommate of Paul's, Derek C., said Paul joked about Kristin's disappearance. However, these allegations remain speculative as Paul has hired a lawyer to defend himself from further questioning. 6 years after her disappearance, Denise Smart said it was a difficult time. A longtime case follower, Chris Lambert, who was 8 at the time, was haunted by Kristin's disappearance. As he grew older, he wondered why the case of Kristin were still no answers. In 2018, Chris quit his job to create a podcast about the case full-time. With no formal training in law or journalism, he was driven only by his passion for finding answers. In 2019, Chris visited Kristin's memorial on her birthday and decided to wait to meet someone willing to talk about Kristin. Chris met Kristin's mother and began talking to her about her daughter. From there, Chris and the Smart family built a strong relationship and worked to bring Kristin's story to the public through the podcast, In Your Own Backyard. The podcast began as a local series but quickly went national and garnered over 11 million downloads. The core of the podcast follows the case of Kristin Smart and her disappearance from campus. Chris has a unique ability to get people to feel comfortable sharing information with him. He has interviewed many people who have been involved in the case to varying degrees. Chris is especially interested in witnesses who are reluctant to speak or have been ignored by investigators. He has uncovered many allegations that have been speculation for years. An interview with an Australian exchange student brought to light a possible fight between Kristin and Paul. According to Chris, the student allegedly saw Kristin fighting with Paul on the night of her disappearance. During the investigation into Kristin Smart's disappearance, several theories emerged. The first theory was that Paul Flores was injured in a fight with Kristin. The second theory was that Paul's father, Ruben Flores, helped cover up the crime. The third theory was that Kristin's body was buried in the Flores backyard. The investigation also revealed allegations of serious misconduct by Paul toward multiple women. Women who had attended school or worked with Paul reported his excessive flirting and excessive drinking. Several women accused Paul of sexual or physical assault, including harassment and controlling behavior. Chris attempted to contact Paul for an interview, but was unsuccessful. An interview could have cleared up some of the loose ends and given Paul a chance to address the allegations against him. However, Chris has not contacted Kristin's family. San Luis Obispo Police Chief Parkinson praised Chris for his work in helping to advance the investigation into Kristin Smart's disappearance. Chris created a compelling, well-done podcast that drew people to the case. Parkinson noted that going public with the story convinced several people involved to come forward, which had a significant impact on the investigation. Denise Smart also thanked Chris for his hard work, saying that the podcast had created an opportunity for people to come together to seek the truth. She also thanked Sheriff Parkinson for helping to keep the case fresh since he took office in 2011. Although the Flores family has remained silent, the investigation and podcast have shaken their confidence. On January 29, 2020, 2 trucks owned by Paul Flores were presented as evidence. Then, on February 5 of that year, authorities executed search warrants at 4 different locations, including a home in Los Angeles. During the search, Paul Flores was briefly detained. On April 22, 2020, the Los Angeles Times reported that a search warrant was executed at Paul Flores' home in San Pedro, California. The search resulted in the recovery of several items of evidence, including date rape drugs and videos showing Paul Flores sexually assaulting young women. Paul Flores was subsequently arrested on February 11, 2021, in Palos Verdes, Rancho, California, on suspicion of being a felon in possession of a firearm. In March of that year, a search warrant was issued at the home of Paul's father, Ruben Flores, and police used dogs and ground-penetrating radar to search the property, and an older Volkswagen was towed away for evidence after the dogs conducted the search. On April 13, Paul and his father, Ruben, were arrested by the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department in connection with Kristin's case. Paul and Ruben were charged in the case involving Kristin. Paul was charged with murder, and Ruben was charged with accessory after the fact. Due to the statute of limitations, Paul was able to escape the sexual assault charge but still faced a first-degree murder charge for allegedly killing during attempted rape. In September 2021, a judge declared the case sufficient to go to trial in April 2022. However, the trial was postponed and moved to Monterey County. On July 18, 2022, Paul and Ruben's trials began simultaneously but with two separate jury groups. In his opening statement, Deputy Prosecutor Chris Pavril described Kristin as a young person who had been cruelly treated and taken too soon. He said Kristin's family was suffering from the unknown whereabouts of their daughter and blamed Paul Flores for this. The deputy prosecutor also presented evidence found at Ruben's home that showed both Paul and Ruben were responsible for Kristin's death and the disposal of her body. However, Paul's defense attorney, Robert Sanger, questioned the veracity of this evidence. He said it was a tragic situation that Kristin's body was never found and there was no DNA evidence. He stated that people believed she was dead, but there was no concrete evidence of what happened to her after Paul left her at the dorm. Since July, Paul Flores' trial has attracted public attention as multiple allegations of harassment and violence have been made. Several women have come forward to accuse Paul Flores of inappropriate behavior, including two women who call themselves Rondado and Saradu. Both women alleged that they met Paul Flores and then felt unusually lethargic, leading to memory loss. When they woke up, they said Paul Flores had abused them. Their detailed and emotional testimony brought jurors to tears, forcing Judge Jennifer O'Keefe to call a recess. In addition, testimony regarding the search of Ruben Flores' home also moved another juror to tears. Investigators and experts also attended the trial, providing more details about the case. Judge O'Keefe said the trial would be long and difficult, and jurors would likely be emotional at times. One of the key pieces of evidence presented at the trial was Jennifer Hudson's testimony. She said she met Paul Flores when she was 17, and that he told her that he had buried Kristin Smart under the slope in his backyard in Hawasna. This was one of the most important pieces of evidence presented at the trial. Paul's defense attorney questioned Jennifer's testimony and highlighted her recreational use of drugs and alcohol, calling into question her credibility. The attorney suggested that she was being dishonest in her answers to the question. In fact, Jennifer admitted in a social media post that she did not report the incident to police until after a podcast aired. She also canceled an interview with a detective after meeting with the podcast producer in 2019. The attorney went on to ask Jennifer if she thought Kristin Smart was buried in Susan Flores' backyard. She suggested that this was the most plausible explanation. When the attorney pursued the subject of Jennifer's association with biker gang members, the prosecutor objected to the question and the judge sided with them. During cross-examination, Pavril asked Jennifer to explain her previous testimony and that Jennifer felt responsible for the Smart family's suffering. She explained that if she had not been afraid, she would have spoken up sooner. Jennifer then broke down in tears. No reason was given, and the trial was adjourned after Jennifer's testimony. The trial of Kristin Smart is scheduled to continue until October 2022. For the Smart family, the emotional, decades-long search for the truth is finally coming to an end. However, the grief over the loss of their daughter will never end. On October 18, 2022, separate juries hearing the case simultaneously in Monterey County Circuit Court found Paul Flores guilty of first-degree murder and his father, Ruben Flores, not guilty of being an accessory after the fact. Ruben Flores faces a maximum sentence of 3 years in prison. Paul Flores was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison on March 10, 2023. Paul Flores is currently serving his sentence at Pleasant Valley State Prison. On August 23, 2023, Flores was attacked by fellow inmate Jason Boudreau, who was serving a life sentence for killing his girlfriend. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shanynthia Gardner. Shanynthia Gardner was born in the late 1980s in Memphis, Tennessee. Not much is known about her early life. She is the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass from Madison, Alabama. Shanynthia was a slim, beautiful brunette with curly hair as a child. Shanynthia was a multi-talented person. Her creative spirit was evident in her songwriting abilities, which helped her become a local celebrity. Shanynthia also has a keen eye for fashion and photography, attends church regularly, and spends time with her family. Shanynthia seems well-rounded and full of promise for a bright future. Shanynthia met Daryl Clayton when she was 14 years old. They became close friends. As they grew up and graduated from high school, their friendship turned into love. Shanynthia and Daryl often spent time together. In 2008, Daryl was accused of assaulting a woman, albeit unintentionally, which led to charges being filed against him. Fortunately for him, the charges were eventually dropped. Shanynthia and Daryl did not get married, but they decided to live together as a couple. In 2008, they had a son named Kristin. Shanynthia took on a motherly role, not only to her own son but also to Daryl's 2 children from a previous relationship. Shanynthia was a devoted mother and caring partner, which made her special to those around her. Although Shanynthia's relationship with Daryl did not last long, to Daryl, Shanynthia remained a loving wife and mother. Her life took a new turn when Shanynthia married Martin Gardner, the man who brought her joy and gave her a stable life. Shanynthia won Martin over with her kindness, love for children, and gentle nature. Their relationship developed quickly, and in September 2013, they decided to start a life together, moving into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. Their wedding marked the beginning. Shanynthia and her husband Martin started their family with the arrival of their first child, baby Talon Gardner. Their family grew as little Saya Gardner was born in 2014, followed by 2 more girls, Savi and Yahtzee. Martin and Shanynthia had 4 children together, in addition to a child from her previous relationship, creating a busy and happy home. Shanynthia prioritizes her family's health and also enjoys her part-time job at the Children's Hospital. Additionally, she supports a charity center that focuses on raising funds to support children. Her compassionate nature fuels her passion to dedicate her life to helping others. On July 1, 2016, Martin had a phone conversation with Shanynthia around noon, as she was getting ready to watch a movie with their children. The couple were chatting quietly. Shanynthia suddenly lost control and grabbed a kitchen knife. She walked into the living room, where she brutally attacked her 6-month-old daughter, Yahtzee, without any apparent reason or provocation. The innocent child, unable to defend herself, was tragically killed at the hands of her mother. The eldest child, a 7-year-old boy named Kristin, witnessed the horrific scene. Too young to understand the situation, the boy ran away from home. Shanynthia, still armed with the knife, pursued her son out of the house, intent on continuing her violent rampage. The boy's terrified screams caught the attention of nearby neighbors. Realizing that the neighbor had seen Kristin, Shanynthia immediately stopped. She returned to the house where Savi and Talon were lying. Upon entering the house, Shanynthia rushed to the bedroom where her young children were lying and rushed to kill them. Neighbors who witnessed the horrific scene quickly contacted the police for assistance, pleading for help in rescuing Kristin and his siblings. The police arrived at Shaninthia's home. They found Shanynthia covered in blood, along with her 4 dead children. The scene shocked everyone. Shanynthia, still holding her cell phone in her hand, calmly called her husband Martin and confessed to killing the children. By the time the police arrived, the incident was over, and an eerie silence had fallen over the once happy home of the Shanynthia family. The house was now a scene of horror, with blood stains in every corner. A bloody knife, recovered by the police. When clergy and police arrived to assist, they were confronted with a horrifying reality. The police began gathering information and conducting an investigation. Shanynthia was held without bail and her trial is scheduled for July 5th. Michelle Jaiman, Shaninthia's co-worker, defended Shanynthia on social media. Michelle highlighted the possibility of Shanynthia suffering from postpartum depression. Cases like Shaninthia's have sparked discussions about mental illness and such tragic events. Dr. Joel Rissman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that mothers killing their children is extremely rare and is usually related to underlying mental health issues. Dr. Diane Barnes, an expert in psychology and postpartum health, made a crucial distinction between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. According to her, these are two distinct conditions with unique symptoms. Dr. Diane cast doubt on the idea that Shanynthia Gardner was suffering from postpartum depression at the time of her actions. Craig Morton was appointed as Shaninthia's defense attorney. During the July 5, 2016 court hearing, Shanynthia participated via video link, but remained completely silent, not answering any questions from Judge L. Lambert. After the trial, Shanynthia was admitted to a mental health institute. Meanwhile, Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols were preparing to file a warrant for evidence gathered in the case. In January 2017, Shanynthia faced formal charges on 4 counts, 2 counts of child abuse, 1 count of aggravated murder, and 1 count of child neglect. Her mother, Sonia, was shocked and confused when she learned about the horrific incident and immediately rushed to the scene to find her grandson. Initially, Sonia suspected that Shanynthia and Martin were divorcing, and the prospect of raising 5 children alone may have driven Shanynthia to make the desperate decision. Shaninthia's ex-husband, Kaysen's father, said, although he was not his son's guardian after the relationship ended, he was still able to visit Kaysen whenever he wanted. However, the last time he saw his son was in November 2014. He noticed that Shaninthia's behavior was becoming more and more extreme. Every time he tried to contact Kaysen, he was unsuccessful. Those close to Shanynthia observed a change in her. She began to feel irritable, which gradually turned into anxiety, paranoia, and panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, leading many to suspect that she might be suffering from postpartum depression. This change shocked those around her, as Shanynthia had previously been a kind person, and the sudden change in her behavior left many wondering what had led to this tragic situation. The first signs of unusual behavior began in March 2015. Shanynthia Gardner left work and picked up her 5 children. She then drove away from her Memphis home, down an unfamiliar road. Her husband, Martin Gardner, initially thought she had gone for a walk in a nearby park to clear her head. However, as hours passed and Shanynthia did not return home, Martin became concerned and decided to report her missing to the police. He put out an alert for her car, which contained her and their 5 children. Unknown to Martin, Shanynthia had driven more than 74 miles east to Corinth, a place where she had no relatives. She was eventually found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, although the circumstances surrounding her arrival remain unclear. Upon examination, medical staff discovered shallow cuts to Shaninthia's neck and one wrist. It appeared she had attempted to harm herself, leaving many questions unanswered for her young children, who were too young to fully understand the situation. Following her return home, Shaninthia's behavior became increasingly strange. She claimed that someone was threatening her and her family, but she provided no details about the identity of the person or their motives. Martin was shocked, as there had been no previous threats or incidents. Additionally, Shanynthia began expressing dissatisfaction with her job and workload when around family and friends, stating that she felt terrible about it. She eventually started claiming that some of her co-workers were out to harm her. Despite these erratic claims, Sheila did not display any signs of violent or abusive behavior towards her children or others. Sheila Gardner's trial begins in 2021. Her defense team is focusing on her mental illness. The judge, James of the Shelby County Criminal Court, rejected the defense's argument, and in December 2021, Sheila Gardner was found guilty of all charges. Sheila Gardner, then 34, was sentenced in February 2022. She received a life sentence for each murder charge and 15 years for each count of child abuse and neglect. Due to Tennessee's laws, Sheila Gardner will be eligible for parole after serving a total of 51 years in prison. After the sentencing, the prosecutor expressed his agreement with the decision, stating that it aligned with his goal of achieving justice for Martin and his children. Martin felt a sense of relief knowing that Sheila would no longer be able to harm any children. A vigil was held at the apartment complex where the family lived, attended by neighbors, family members, law enforcement officers, and others. Sonia, the grandmother of one of the victims, was among those in attendance. The group lit red and white candles and prayed for the victims. Following the loss, Martin's colleagues set up a social media account to help him prepare for the funeral of his 4 children. During the service, Martin gave an emotional final speech, recalling his home as a place filled with happiness when his children and Sheila were present, and expressing his intention to keep that memory alive. The case of Brandon Duran. Brandon Duran was born in 1980 in San Diego, California, to a father who was a passionate motorcyclist and a former member of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, considered a criminal organization by the FBI. When Brandon was around 10 years old, his parents divorced, but they maintained a good relationship and shared responsibilities in raising their son. Brandon inherited his father's love for motorcycles and at 25, built his own bike from scratch, which became a treasured possession. He socialized with other bikers but never joined a motorcycle club. However, his life took a dramatic turn when his father unexpectedly passed away in April 2005, plunging Brandon into depression. To overcome his grief, Brandon decided to make a change in his life and embarked on a road trip to Las Vegas on his motorcycle. During his year-long stay in Vegas, he met Amber Andrews, 24, and they fell deeply in love. Their whirlwind romance led to marriage just 2 months later, and Amber became pregnant soon after. In December 2006, Amber gave birth to their son, Brando. The arrival of his son marked a significant transformation in Brandon's life. He became a devoted father and husband, prioritizing his family over his personal interests and securing a high-paying job. Amber failed to prioritize her new role as a mother, instead continuing to frequent biker gatherings and parties. This led to a rapid deterioration in the young family's relationships, with fights becoming increasingly common. The inevitable outcome was divorce, filed just 4 years after their wedding. Brandon was granted full custody of their child due to his ability to provide for himself and his son, unlike Amber. After the divorce was finalized in 2010, Amber returned to her hometown in Oklahoma, while Brandon went back to San Diego with their son. There, he was reunited with his family, who helped him raise his child. As time passed, Brandon's emotional wounds from the failed marriage began to heal, and he became optimistic about the future. However, in the summer of 2012, Amber unexpectedly showed up at his doorstep, asking for a second chance at their relationship. Brandon's long-suppressed feelings resurfaced, and he chose to believe in Amber's sincerity, agreeing to give their relationship another try. With their son Brando set to start kindergarten in September, Amber requested that the 3 of them visit her parents in Oklahoma, who were eager to see their grandson. Brandon consented, and they began preparing for the trip, planning to stay in Oklahoma for about a week. A few days before Brandon, Amber and their son were due to return to San Diego, Van Emblem reached out to the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. He reported that his friend and employer, 30-year-old Justin Hammer from Garvin County, had asked for his help in disposing of a body claiming it was that of Brandon Duran. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation alerted the local sheriff, who immediately visited Hammer's ranch with his assistant. They also contacted Brandon's relatives in San Diego, who informed them that they had been unable to reach Brandon for several days. Once this information was confirmed, the authorities decided not to share the details of the case with Brandon's family. Justin Hammer unexpectedly confessed to killing Brandon Duran when questioned by detectives. However, he claimed it was self-defense, saying that Brandon, a member of a dangerous motorcycle gang, had come to his house on August 7th, kicked in the door, and threatened him. According to Hammer, Brandon was angry about his relationship with Amber and threatened to harm him and his family if he didn't stay away from her. Hammer said he grabbed a nearby shotgun and fired it, killing Brandon. Fearing retaliation from the motorcycle club, Hammer did not call the police and instead hid the evidence. He dismembered Brandon's body in the bathroom using a saw, then put the remains in 5-gallon buckets filled with cement. Hammer needed help loading the heavy buckets into his pickup truck, so he asked his friend Van for assistance. After they loaded the buckets, Van left and reported Hammer to the police. Hammer's ranch had a small pond where he disposed of the buckets after handling the body. He then cleaned the house and later burned the cleaning supplies, gloves, and rags. According to Hammer, he gave Brandon's motorcycle to a relative who unknowingly received the bike and dismantled it for spare parts. The police investigation led to the discovery of 5 buckets at the bottom of the pond. When the officers informed Amber about Brandon's death, she was shocked. She revealed that although she and Brandon were divorced, they had planned to reunite. Amber also confessed to having fought with Brandon the day before his death, following his discovery of her affair with Justin Hammer. This new information prompted the investigators to focus on Amber. She claimed that Brandon left on his motorcycle after their argument, but his family said it was broken. The question arose, if the motorcycle wasn't severely damaged, why would Brandon take it to Oklahoma for repairs instead of fixing it locally? Amber's story about her whereabouts on the day of Brandon's death raised suspicions. She claimed to have a doctor's appointment, but the police couldn't find any records of her visiting a medical facility that day. This meant she had no alibi for the time of Brandon's death. Detectives later found out that Amber had asked a friend to watch her son that day. When the friend arrived at 3 p.m., Amber and Brandon left the house together in Brandon's pickup truck, which had a motorcycle in the back. Amber left her phone behind and didn't return for 8 hours. When she finally came back, Brandon and the motorcycle were no longer with the truck. On Amber's phone, investigators discovered a message from Justin Hammer sent just before she and Brandon left the house, which read, "The ink is ready." The police thought this was a code, indicating that everything was in place to deal with Brandon. After talking to Amber's close friends, detectives learned that she had no interest in getting back together with her ex-husband and often spoke negatively about him. She was bitter about Brandon having full custody of their son and resented him. New evidence emerged that contradicted Amber's account. Forensic analysis confirmed that Amber had written the suspicious note found in Hammer's safe, which listed items necessary for disposing of a body. Furthermore, footage from the local hardware store's CCTV cameras revealed that the crime was premeditated. The footage showed Hammer purchasing buckets and other items from Amber's list the day before Brandon's murder. Despite this, Hammer claimed during his trial that he had acted alone in self-defense, attempting to shield Amber from suspicion. He asserted that the items on the list were actually for home repairs, not for getting rid of the body. Justin Hammer claimed to have used 2 weapons during the crime, holding a shotgun in one hand and a pistol in the other. However, investigators found this statement suspicious and unlikely. The trial, expected to last several weeks, surprisingly ended with the jury deliberating for only an hour and a half. They returned with a recommended sentence of life in prison without parole. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Austin expressed satisfaction with the verdict, stating it was a fitting punishment and brought justice to Brandon Duran's family. She believed the sentence was appropriate. Cindy Ware, Brandon's mother, was overjoyed with the jury's decision and acknowledged that it must have been a difficult one to make. She had been hoping for this outcome for 2 years. In October 2014, Justin Hammer was formally sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2 months later, his wife Amber was arrested and charged with first-degree murder of her ex-husband, desecrating his remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Despite pleading not guilty, Amber was denied bail. Amber sat in the courtroom, handcuffed and dressed in a light purple inmate suit, expressing frustration that it had taken 32 months to be reunited with her son. She had only just been allowed to return home to him a month prior, and she was desperate to stay with him until the trial. However, District Judge Jeff Virgin of Norman, Oklahoma, denied her request for bail, agreeing with the prosecution's argument that the seriousness of the allegations against her made her a flight risk. The trial, which began in the spring of 2017, was a long time coming. Over 2 years had passed since Amber was charged. She maintained her innocence, with her lawyers claiming she was not present at the crime scene. Conversely, prosecutors Christy Miller and Jennifer Austin argued that Andrews had the strongest motive to kill Brandon Duran. Miller testified that Amber Andrews was the only person with a motive to want him gone, as she needed him to disappear in order to regain custody of their son. According to Miller, Amber had a strong reason to want him out of the way, and Hammer had a place where the crime could be committed. They thought they had come up with the perfect plan. The prosecutor explained that Amber's motive was to get rid of Duran so she could regain custody of their young son. He pointed out that Amber had been absent from home for 8 hours on the day of Brandon's death, and there was no evidence to support her alibi. The prosecutor suggested that Amber had helped Hammer get rid of the body and clean up the house, neglecting her parental responsibilities in the process. However, the defense attorney Jay Mendros argued that the prosecutor's office had not provided any evidence linking Amber to the crime. He told the jurors that when there is no evidence, the prosecution resorts to attacking Amber's character. According to Mendros, the state's case was based on a theory, but there was no concrete evidence to support it. Mendros claimed that Amber was not capable of planning a murder, and that Justin, who was afraid of losing her, had committed the crime. Mendros described the situation as a recipe for disaster, with Duran visiting Oklahoma to rekindle his romance with Amber, while Hammer, who had been Amber's boyfriend for a year, feared losing her to Duran. The defense attorney portrayed the case as a tragic love triangle, where Justin Hammer had a strong motive to kill Brandon Duran, as he was torn between his feelings for Amber and the threat Duran posed. The attorney argued that Amber had been emotionally involved with both men and had oscillated between them, making it difficult to pinpoint her true intentions. The prosecution's case relied on twisted and distorted statements that created a sinister impression in an attempt to imprison someone based on speculation and rumors. The attorney emphasized that, in the American justice system, people are not convicted on assumptions. There must be concrete evidence, and in this case, there was none to suggest that Amber was a co-conspirator or a murderer. Justin Hammer had confessed to the murder, taking full responsibility for the crime. However, during the trial, it was Amber Andrews who was found guilty of the crime. The jurors delivered a guilty verdict after hearing closing arguments, recommending a life sentence for the 35-year-old. Amber appeared in court on June 12, 2017, seemingly in a good mood, awaiting sentencing. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, took the stand, overcome with emotion, to share how her son's murder had impacted her and her grandson, Brando. Cindy placed a photo of Duran next to the stand and expressed how Amber had shattered all her dreams. She stated that Brandon's only wish was to be with his family, and Amber had brutally taken that away from him. Cindy sorrowfully reflected on the memories they would never create, such as Brandon teaching Brando how to snowboard and the bright smile that would never again light up a room. Before the judge's final decision, defense attorney Jay Mendros addressed the court once more. He maintained that there was still no concrete evidence linking Amber to the murder and requested that the judge dismiss the jury's guilty verdict and restart the case. Mendros argued that the prosecution's case lacked credible evidence and relied heavily on emotional manipulation to sway the jurors. In essence, the state built a case against Amber based on speculation and gut feelings, rather than concrete proof. The prosecution's strategy was to shock and outrage the jurors, rather than present tangible evidence. As a result, Amber was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the first-degree murder of Brandon Duran, plus additional time for desecrating human remains and conspiring to commit a felony. Meanwhile, Justin Hammer is currently serving his sentence at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma, while Amber Andrews is incarcerated at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma. Brandon Duran has been in the care of the Oklahoma Department of Human Services since August 7, 2012, living with a foster family. In January 2013, Brando was finally allowed to return to San Diego to live with his grandmother, Cindy, after a long and difficult court battle. However, this was not the end of the fight. It took Cindy 5 more years to gain full legal custody of Brando. Once the custody battle was over, Cindy and her relatives sat down with Brando to explain the truth about the verdict and what had happened to his mother. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Paige Bergfeld. After high school, Paige attended the University of Florida's nursing school, where she met Howard Bigler. They started dating after realizing their mutual feelings for each other. After graduating with a nursing degree, Paige returned to Colorado to live with her family. In 1995, she and Howard got married. At first, they seemed like a happy couple, sharing many common interests and views. However, they had a significant disagreement that eventually led to their divorce. Paige wanted to have a child and start a family, but Howard didn't share her desire. This issue caused frequent arguments and discussions, but they couldn't find a compromise. In 1997, they decided to divorce. Despite this, they remained friends due to their strong connection. Paige later married Rob Dixon, but that marriage also ended in divorce. After her second divorce, Paige reconnected with Howard. He claimed to be one of the last people to see her alive. On the 28th, Howard and Paige, who were previously married, met in Eagle County, Colorado, to attend to personal matters. They spent Thursday together, after which they returned to their separate homes. Following their meeting, they continued to stay in touch through phone calls. Later, when Paige went missing, Howard quickly reached out to emergency services to report his concerns. During the call, he expressed his deep worry and belief that something terrible might have happened to her. Howard mentioned that Paige was a devoted mother who would never abandon her children without a valid reason. A recording of the call confirmed this, and cell tower data verified that Howard was in the Denver, Colorado area on the day Paige disappeared, which is a significant distance from where she was last seen. This evidence led the police to rule Howard out as a suspect. The investigation then focused on Paige's relationship with her second husband, Rob Dixon, and uncovered several suspicious incidents that required further investigation. Paige had previously reported her husband Rob to the police twice for harassment during their marriage. Before marrying Rob, Paige worked at a strip club in Denver, where she met him. Rob came from a wealthy family and had inherited a significant fortune. The two fell in love and got married in 1998. The couple settled in a luxurious home in Colorado, where Paige realized her dream of becoming a mother. Within a few years, they had 3 children who became the center of Paige's life. The early years of their marriage seemed happy, with the couple enjoying a luxurious lifestyle. However, things took a turn for the worse due to Rob's financial difficulties. Rob's family businesses faced severe issues, leading to a significant decline in their economic situation. As a result, Rob was forced to file for bankruptcy, which triggered a deep family crisis. By 2004, tensions had escalated to the point where Paige called emergency services twice. The first time, she reported that Rob had threatened to kill her and their children, but when the police arrived, they claimed to have resolved their issues. A year later, Paige reported Rob for assaulting her while she was holding their youngest child. Rob was arrested and charged with third-degree assault. He eventually pleaded guilty to 1 count of molestation, but the trial was dismissed and he avoided jail time. The couple's relationship continued to deteriorate, leading them to separate. Rob then moved to Pennsylvania. During the investigation into Paige's disappearance, Rob was interviewed to establish his alibi for that day. He claimed to have been at home and could not have harmed her. The investigators could not find any evidence to implicate Rob in her disappearance. In fact, Rob actively participated in the search for Paige. The investigating officers left no stone unturned in their effort to find clues and solve the mystery of the missing mother. The investigation into Paige's disappearance began with a thorough examination of her car. It was hoped that evidence in the car could help locate her or provide clues about what had happened. Sergeant Weiler of the County Sheriff's Department noted that arson is often used to destroy evidence, but in this case, the examination of the vehicle yielded valuable information. The driver's seat was found to be pushed back as far as it would go, indicating that the last person to drive the car was a tall individual, inconsistent with Paige's short stature. The trunk of the car contained Paige's notebook, with pages torn out from June 26 to June 29. As time passed, the search for Paige became increasingly urgent. A break in the case came when a driver stopped on a highway southeast of town to fix a flat tire and discovered a checkbook lying nearby. He reported it to the authorities, who then searched the area and found additional items belonging to Paige, including medical records and insurance cards. Sergeant Weiler's investigation into Paige Bergfeld's disappearance took a dramatic turn when he found a business card on the road, leading him to a shocking discovery. Paige was secretly working as an escort under the alias Carrie. This revelation completely upended the investigation, as it revealed a side of Paige's life that her loved ones knew nothing about. Previously, it was believed that Paige was a devoted mother who worked hard to provide for her children after her divorce. She had started her own children's clothing business, taught dance lessons, and sold kitchen supplies. Despite her busy schedule, she always made time for her children and was actively involved in their school activities. However, the discovery of the secret phone Paige used for her escort work revealed a completely different picture. This phone became a crucial piece of evidence, leading police to unravel a complex mystery that was far more sinister than anyone had initially suspected. The investigation into Paige's disappearance led to more questions than answers. What prompted a responsible mother and successful businesswoman to lead a secret life? And how was this double life connected to her vanishing? These questions took center stage in the investigation, adding a new layer of mystery. To get to the bottom of things, detectives analyzed Paige's cell phone, found in her car, and examined her contacts and calls from the hours leading up to her disappearance. The last call made from her phone was on June 28th around 9 p.m. This analysis led investigators to identify 7 suspects, one of whom was Lester Ralph Jones. Jones's criminal record raised red flags, particularly his history of violence against women and a previous kidnapping conviction that earned him a 5-year prison sentence. However, it wasn't the only concerning aspect. Jones's white car matched the description of the vehicle seen by Carol, Paige's friend. Carol shared a crucial detail with detectives. Paige had once approached her car, only to find a white car blocking her driveway. Enraged, Paige got behind the wheel to turn around, but the cars collided. The unknown driver quickly fled the scene. Investigators suspected that Lester might have been obsessed with Paige and was stalking her after discovering that he had tried to book an appointment with her for intimate services on the day before she vanished. When questioned, Lester denied any involvement in her disappearance and provided fingerprints and DNA samples. However, a search of his home turned up several incriminating items, including a prepaid phone, wigs, Viagra, a sheet with an escort services phone number, and women's lingerie in various sizes. The prepaid phone caught the investigators' attention due to suspicious calls made to Paige's phone on the day she disappeared. Lester initially denied owning a second phone, which proved to be a lie. Using the phone's packaging found at his home, police traced the purchase to a supermarket on North Avenue. The store's security footage showed Lester buying the phone, which he refused to acknowledge when confronted with the evidence. Lester Jones became the main suspect in Paige's disappearance, but the police couldn't find enough concrete evidence to charge him. They continued to investigate and search for Paige's body, hoping to find proof of his guilt. However, the case stalled for several years, leaving Paige's family and loved ones in a state of unbearable grief. As time passed, the search seemed increasingly futile, and the hope of finding Paige alive began to fade. In 2012, a hiker stumbled upon human remains in a ravine in Delta County, surprisingly close to where Paige's personal belongings had been found 5 years prior. Investigators were nearly certain the body was that of a young mother, and DNA testing confirmed it was indeed Paige. Unfortunately, her story ended in tragedy. The condition of the body made it impossible to determine the exact cause of death, but it was clear she had suffered a brutal beating with multiple broken bones, particularly in her face. It was concluded that her injuries ultimately led to her death. The discovery of Paige's body added a horrific layer to the story. It's believed that her body was buried, but years of soil erosion eventually brought it to the surface, which may explain why it wasn't found sooner. The discovery led to a breakthrough in Lester Ralph Jones's case, which had stalled for years. In November 2014, he was charged with kidnapping, first-degree murder, and second-degree murder. The trial finally began in July 2016 and lasted 22 days. Prosecutors claimed that Lester's frustration over being unable to see Paige, combined with his history of violence against women, motivated the crime. The prosecution's key witness, Lester's ex-wife Lisa, testified about his violent past. She described how Lester kidnapped and threatened to kill her at gunpoint in the late 1990s after she ended their relationship. On one occasion, he attacked her and her partner, shooting the latter in the head. A month later, Lester made another threat, warning her that she would be thrown into a lake. Lisa managed to escape and contacted the police, leading to Lester's arrest on charges of kidnapping and assault. In contrast, Lester's defense attorneys argued that the police had wrongly accused an innocent man and suggested that other clients of Paige's may have had motives for the crime. However, they failed to provide convincing evidence linking anyone else to the murder. Lester's current wife testified, stating that although her husband used an escort service, her faith prevented her from leaving him. Nevertheless, she could not provide an alibi for him and identified him in a supermarket surveillance video where he bought a disposable phone. Lester's first trial ended in a mistrial on September 9, 2016, when the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. However, the district attorney was convinced of Lester's guilt and continued to investigate and re-examine the evidence. After several weeks, on November 21, 2016, the jury finally reached a verdict, finding Lester guilty of all charges related to Paige's death. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. Lester's defense team appealed the sentence, but an appeals court panel upheld the conviction and sentence in June 2022. Paige's funeral was held on April 28, 2012. Her obituary remembered her as a beautiful and radiant woman with a smile that lit up the room. Her tragic death has had a lasting impact on her family and friends, leaving her 3 children without their loving mother and support. The tragic case of Paige captured the nation's attention and spanned many years, but through the unwavering dedication of law enforcement relatives, justice was finally served. Lester Ralph Jones was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, ensuring he can no longer harm innocent people. Paige's courageous story stands as a powerful reminder of the significance of persisting in the pursuit of justice, no matter how long and arduous the journey may be. Her memory will forever be cherished by those who knew and loved her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sumner family. James and Carol Alford, also known as Reggie and Sunar, grew up together in Charleston, South Carolina. They were the same age, attended the same school, and were in the same grade. As they grew older, their childhood friendship blossomed into romance. By the time they were 15, they had started dating and were inseparable. Their friends thought they made a beautiful couple, and James and Carol kept photos of their happy early years in their archives. They dreamed of a long, happy life together and planned to get married as soon as they turned 18. Their parents approved of their relationship and supported their decision. However, their plans were put on hold when James was called up for military service in the Army. They decided to postpone their wedding until his return and exchanged regular letters. But as time passed, James was sent to Vietnam, and contact with him was lost. Carol didn't know if he was alive, as he stopped writing to her. Carol continued her studies and got a job at the Charleston Air Force Base. She married twice, first in the late 1960s, but that marriage ended quickly and she had no children. In 1975, she married Richard Alford, with whom she had a daughter, Rhonda, in 1977. But her second marriage was also troubled, as her husband abused her and their daughter. In the mid-1980s, Carol could no longer tolerate the abuse and filed for divorce, taking her daughter with her. But Richard continued to harass her, trying to ruin her life. In 1987, he attacked her, shooting her several times in front of their 10-year-old daughter. Carol was lucky to survive, thanks to her neighbors who called for help. She underwent multiple surgeries, blood transfusions, and eventually recovered, although she lost sight in one eye and was left disabled. Her health began to deteriorate again in the late 1990s, and after a series of tests, she was diagnosed with liver cancer. In 1987, Carol's life was in danger due to medical complications, and she unknowingly contracted the hepatitis C virus. Over time, the virus damaged her liver, leading to cancer. Fortunately, with proper treatment and therapy, her condition stabilized. However, she had to take daily medications and undergo regular checkups for the rest of her life. The hepatitis C diagnosis, combined with previous severe gunshot wounds, made it impossible for her to work physically demanding jobs. She eventually found work as a call center operator. Meanwhile, James, her high school sweetheart, had a traumatic experience in Vietnam. He was severely wounded and mistakenly reported dead. He survived and returned home, but lost contact with Carol. Years later, James married, but the marriage ended and he was left alone, struggling with chronic health issues. In 2000, Carol received a call at work from a familiar voice, James. She was hesitant to believe it was really him, as she thought he had died in the war. The two cried and reminisced, eventually agreeing to meet in person. After 38 years apart, they reunited and rekindled their romance. Carol and James started seeing each other daily and soon decided to move in together. They got married 5 months later and lived in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood of Charleston, South Carolina. Despite their health issues, they were happy and took care of each other. They lived near the Cole family, who had their own set of troubles, including Stephen, a Vietnam veteran confined to a wheelchair, and his wife Natalie, who often spent time with friends in bars. Tiffany, the daughter of James's ex, was often left to fend for herself from a young age. She would hang out on the streets with no money, not even for small treats. When James and Carol started living together, Tiffany was still in high school. Carol, being kind-hearted, sympathized with the girl who was unwanted by her own mother. For 5 years, Carol looked out for Tiffany like a daughter, inviting her to family meals, buying her clothes, and giving her money for expenses. In 2004, when the Summers decided to sell their Chevrolet Lumino minivan, Tiffany asked to buy it in installments since she had no money and desperately needed a car. The Summers agreed to sell it to her for a very low price, divided into 12 payments over a year. In early 2005, the Summers were forced to move to Florida due to their deteriorating health. Doctors recommended a warmer climate, so they sold their Charleston home and bought a new one in Jacksonville, along with a Lincoln Town car. They were happy in their new home, making plans for their future. Every day, Carol would call her adult daughter Rhonda, sharing her thoughts and plans. But one day in June 2005, Carol didn't call, and Rhonda couldn't reach her. Rhonda was worried but hoped everything was okay. The next day, there was still no answer. Rhonda called her mother's and James's cell phones every half hour, but they were unavailable and the answering machine remained unanswered. On the third day, Rhonda drove to Florida to check on her mother and stepfather. When she arrived, she noticed the car was missing, the front door was open, and the house was in disarray. There was a table set for dinner, but the food was 3 days old. It looked like the owners had abruptly left in the middle of a meal. Rhonda saw medications, including her mother's cancer pills and James's insulin, on the bedside table. The cell phones were dead. Rhonda realized her mother and stepfather couldn't have left without their medications and phones, so she contacted the police to report the incident. The police put out a wanted list for the Summers car, blocked their bank cards, and began searching for them. The first few days yielded no results, but on June 12th, a man called a bank, claiming to be James Schur, complaining that his card was blocked. This led the police to investigate further. The bank employee became suspicious when checking the card information and offered Mr. Schur to visit the nearest branch to resolve the issue, but he hung up. Shortly after, a woman called from the same number, claiming to be Mrs. Carol Schur, and reported a similar problem with her blocked card. When asked to visit the bank in person, she refused, citing health issues, and asked to regain access to her savings, which was denied. The bank immediately handed over the call recordings and information to the police. When played to Rhonda, the couple's daughter, she confirmed that the voices did not belong to her parents, who were in their 60s, while the callers sounded much younger. The police suspected that the imposters were involved in the couple's disappearance, either holding them captive or killing them after obtaining bank account information. A few days later, the couple's abandoned car was found on a deserted road with no signs of struggle or blood inside. However, hair and sweat marks from both spouses were found in the trunk, suggesting they were taken away in their own car. Further investigation revealed that money had been withdrawn from their accounts after their disappearance, and ATM footage showed a young man making the withdrawals. The police traced the calls made from the imposter's number and found that the SIM card was purchased shortly before the couple's disappearance. A call was made to a car rental company where a Mazda RX-8 was rented under the name Tiffany Cole. The same car was used to withdraw money from the couple's accounts. Using the car's built-in tracking device, the police located the Mazda RX-8 at a hotel in Charleston. A team was sent to apprehend the suspects, who were found celebrating in their hotel room, surrounded by packages and receipts from lavish purchases. The three suspects, Tiffany Cole, Michael J. Jackson, and Alan Lindell Wade, were taken into custody and questioned separately. Initially, they feigned ignorance or remained silent, but after several hours of interrogation and presentation of evidence, Tiffany confessed to robbing the elderly couple and using their stolen money to fund their lifestyle. Tiffany and her new boyfriend stayed overnight at the Summers house, where they were treated to dinner and hospitality. During the meal, Carol Summers mentioned that they had almost $100,000 in savings, which sparked an idea in Tiffany's mind. That night, Tiffany and her boyfriend began making plans to get their hands on the money. They enlisted the help of two accomplices, Bruce and Alan, and started putting their plan into action. On June 6th, Tiffany rented a car while Bruce and Alan stole 4 shovels. Together, they drove to a deserted spot in the woods and began digging a grave for the Summers. On July 8th, Tiffany bought rope and duct tape, which she gave to Bruce and Alan. That evening, they approached the Summers' house, pretending to need help and asking to use their phone. Carol, feeling sorry for them, let them in. Once inside, Bruce and Alan attacked the Summers, binding their hands and feet with duct tape and blindfolding them. They questioned the couple about their money and valuables, threatening them with torture and death. The Summers gave in, hoping to spare their lives. As soon as the attackers got the information they needed, 2 more accomplices arrived, helping to drag the Summers out to their car. They drove the car to the woods, with Tiffany and her boyfriend following behind in a second car. In the trunk, James managed to free his arm and remove the duct tape from his and his wife's faces. But it was too late. The car stopped, and the Summers were led to the grave, where they were pushed to their deaths. The elderly couple pleaded for their lives, but the young criminals showed no mercy, brutally killing them by burying them alive. According to Bruce, the perpetrators covered the bound couple with earth for about an hour, during which time the victims cried, confessed their love for each other, and said goodbye. The autopsy later revealed that the couple died of suffocation, with pieces of soil found in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and stomachs. After committing the heinous crime, the criminals abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in a rented car. They broke into the Summers house, stealing valuable items, and then returned to South Carolina to spend their loot. However, their celebration was short-lived, as the stolen cards were blocked after 2 days, and all 4 perpetrators were arrested 4 days later. The trial and conviction followed. Bruce Nixon, who had fully admitted his guilt and cooperated with the investigation, was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Tiffany Cole, who claimed she was not directly involved in the murder, was given the death penalty, along with Jackson and Lindell, who had chosen to remain silent. The evidence against them, including Tiffany's involvement in the criminal plan, renting a car, and participating in the grave digging, was overwhelming. The 4 criminals appealed their sentences multiple times, but they were all denied. Although Jackson, Tiffany, and Lindell were sentenced to death, the penalty was never carried out, even 18 years after their atrocious crime. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Carmen Thomas. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987, in South Africa. When she was just 10 years old, her father passed away. This tragic loss had a profound impact on her family, and they decided to Whitby, United Kingdom, to live with relatives. However, they did not find the peace they were seeking, and after some time, they returned to South Africa. Despite the challenges she faced, Carmen decided to stay with her relatives when she turned 18. She later moved to London, where she completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. Carmen had a strong and charismatic personality that drew people to her. She was a loyal friend and companion to many, but living in a big city like London came with a high price tag. To maintain a decent standard of living, Carmen had to work hard. During the day, she worked as a marketer in a store, and in her free time, she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Although her choice of part-time job may seem unusual, Carmen was a girl with strong values and never engaged in unnecessary or undignified behavior, which earned her the respect of her clients. In this place, she met Brad Callahan, a charming and flamboyant man. Born in New Zealand in April 1978, Brad's parents separated when he was 9 years old, and he stayed with his mother. They later moved to Australia in 2001. After graduating from university with an engineering degree in the construction industry, Brad was offered a job as chief structural engineer for a large business complex in the UK. To boost his professional image, Brad hired a gentleman's agency and met Carmen, a beautiful, intelligent, and tall woman with dark hair and bright eyes. Although they started with a casual arrangement, Brad and Carmen continued to communicate informally, which eventually turned into a strong friendship, and later, love. Their romantic relationship blossomed quickly, and they soon moved in together. Their life was built on trust, care, and mutual support, making them look absolutely happy. Carmen became pregnant, and Brad thought it would be best for them to move back to New Zealand, where the air is clean and the pace of life is more relaxed. They returned to Auckland in March 2005. After their son Jack was born, he brought immense joy and happiness into their lives from day one. Carmen and Brad prioritized his safety and well-being, providing everything he needed for a happy childhood. To them, Jack was the center of their universe. However, with Jack's arrival, serious disagreements began to surface in their relationship. The first disagreements arose over how to raise their child. As a result, their relationship became rocky and unstable, ultimately leading to their breakup 3 years later. Despite the challenges, they shared joint custody of Jack and made a genuine effort to maintain a positive relationship for his sake. The breakup was difficult for both Carmen and Brad, but they put their differences aside to ensure little Jack's well-being. Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, in Oakland, seeking emotional support and a sense of family. As time passed, Carmen regained her emotional balance and started rebuilding her life without Brad. In 2008, she decided to move to a house on a nearby street to Brad's so her young son could be closer to his father. Carmen, who had lost her own father at a young age, wanted to ensure her child would have a father figure in his life as much as possible. Carmen and Brad maintained a relationship for the sake of their son, but many people mistakenly thought they remained couple. In truth, they only communicated when necessary to support their child. As they went their separate ways, both Carmen and Brad concentrated on finding personal happiness. Brad continued his career as a construction engineer and eventually started a new relationship in May 2009, which led to an engagement. Carmen focused on raising their son while working at the Gentlemen's Club, which upset Brad. He thought the mother of his child should not be involved in questionable activities. This disagreement created tension in their relationship, which worsened over time. Carmen issued ultimatums, but Brad ignored them. Despite this, Brad got married again and was expecting another child. His new financial responsibilities affected the alimony he paid Carmen for Jack's care. The money issue triggered a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police due to a domestic violence incident. Carmen was involved in a physical altercation with Brad during an argument and received a warning. Their relationship finally broke down. Even after separation, arguments continued. Each new question about Jack's care sparked aggression and conflict between the two former lovers. They couldn't agree on something as simple as which school Jack should attend, leading to more disputes. On June 29, 2010, Brad visited Carmen's house to finalize a written agreement for child support and discuss a new school for Jack. However, Carmen was unhappy with the document and refused to sign it. In a heated argument, she shouted that Jack was not Brad's son and told him to leave. Brad departed. 2 weeks passed without Brad contacting Carmen. Concerned for her safety, Brad reported Carmen Thomas missing to the police on July 13, 2010. The authorities took his report and launched an investigation. By analyzing video footage and interviewing neighbors, investigators were able to piece together a timeline of events leading up to Carmen's disappearance, uncovering crucial details that would aid in the search for her. On June 29th, a surveillance camera caught Carmen on tape at a nearby supermarket, not far from the house she shared with Jack. The police were alerted to the house when they noticed that there was no garbage can outside, which seemed unusual. Upon inspecting the house, they found traces of blood on the front door, washing machine, and shower. Forensic experts used luminol to detect blood evidence, which reacts with the iron in hemoglobin. The test revealed multiple patterns of bloodstains on the bathroom door and floor, confirming their suspicions. The landlady reported that on June 29th she heard loud screams, followed by prolonged crying and moaning. She went to Carmen's door, but no one answered. When she looked out the window, she saw a street trash can and an overturned drying rack on the ground. Alarmed, she called her husband. Before he arrived, Brad emerged from the house, holding dirty clothes. When he saw the landlady, he hastily explained that Carmen had undergone a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady was suspicious, noting that Brad looked like he had just showered. Despite her doubts, she didn't call the police, as she had no reason to disbelieve Brad's story. The police investigation focused on Carmen's cell phone, which showed a steady stream of messages and calls. However, the tone and style of these communications didn't match Carmen's usual way of communicating. This sparked even more questions. Where did Carmen go for medical help, and why? Fortunately, the answers weren't far off. As the investigation continued, Carmen's car was discovered. In the back seat, her personal belongings, including luggage and clothes, were found. A closer look at the seized suitcase revealed bloodstains on some items. A note in the car revealed that Carmen owed money to her employer. A surprising discovery was made in the glove compartment, an envelope with Misty's name on it, containing $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield suspected foul play after discovering bloodstains in Carmen's car. A search of the countryside southeast of Auckland was conducted, but Carmen's body was not found. The investigation continued, with detectives analyzing Carmen's and Brad's phone records. They made a surprising discovery. Both phones were in the same location throughout the search period, and Carmen's phone hadn't connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. A crucial piece of evidence was a missing trash can, which had vanished from its usual spot near the house on the day Carmen disappeared. A neighbor had seen it through her window. But why was it necessary for the trash can to be inside the house in the first place? The police investigated Brad's phone and financial records, which revealed some suspicious purchases on June 30th, including a meat cleaver, a large plastic container, and garbage bags. By examining Brad's daily routine, they found some unusual events that didn't fit his normal pattern. One day, he arrived at the construction site very early and spent a long time walking alone around the property. While this was unusual, it wasn't enough to raise concern among the workers who saw him. As the evidence mounted, including Carmen's phone and Brad's questionable purchases, he went from being a victim to a suspect. The police believed that Brad had killed Carmen by hitting her on the head multiple times and then hiding her body. On September 21st, Brad was arrested and charged with Carmen's murder and attempting to modify the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and was scheduled for trial. In a surprising coincidence, Brad's second son was born to his new partner while he was in custody, causing a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father. 9 days after his arrest, Brad broke down and revealed to investigators where he had buried Carmen's body. Brad concocted a plan to make it seem like Carmen had left for Hamilton and never came back. Confident in his scheme, he was convinced he'd pulled it off. However, life had other plans. Under interrogation, Brad recounted the events of that fateful day. It began with a heated argument, which ended with Carmen kicking Brad out of the house and claiming Jack wasn't his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he returned and struck Carmen on the head with a baseball bat, rendering her unconscious. The impact was severe, causing blood to gush from the wound and stain the floor bright red, accompanied by labored breathing. Standing over Carmen's lifeless body, Brad's eyes blazed with a wild, unhinged expression. He realized the gravity of his actions, but his anger and resentment towards Carmen's words clouded his judgment. In a fit of rage, he unleashed several more punches. Although aware of the irreparable consequences, his obsessive fury consumed him. Fleeting memories of happier times flashed before his eyes, but they were now forever lost. Brad knew his life would never be the same after that devastating moment, but he felt no remorse as he had eliminated his primary problem, and Jack was now exclusively his. After regaining consciousness, Brad took a shower and discreetly left Carmen's house. In the subsequent days, he took swift action to dispose of Carmen's body and conceal the evidence of the crime. He contacted his friend and arranged to meet him outside a supermarket, asking him to purchase 3 black garbage bags, kerosene, and cleaning supplies. Brad waited outside the store, trying to avoid raising suspicions. Once his friend had made the purchase, Brad returned to the apartment and began the cleanup process. He meticulously wiped away the blood spatter and then placed the body in a garbage bag, which he later discarded in a trash can. After Carmen's murdered, the defendant cut her body into 8 pieces to dispose of it. He severed her legs at the hip joints, then cut each leg into 2 pieces at the knee. He also severed her arms and head from her torso. On July 3rd, he confided in a friend at a boat ramp in Oahu Bay, Oakland, telling him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help to get rid of the body. However, the friend refused to lend him a boat, and the attempt to dump the remains at sea failed. Over the next few days, the defendant drove to Wyrie Ridge in West Auckland and buried the body parts in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot, leaving behind a suitcase of clothes and other personal belongings to make it seem like she had intentionally left. However, in his hurry, he failed to notice that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After disposing of the car, Brad attempted to create the illusion that Carmen was still alive by sending text messages from her cell phone to her friends. He pretended to be Carmen, claiming she was unwell and had been in poor health for days. However, Brad's plan ultimately failed. On October 1st, the police searched the burial site indicated by Brad and discovered Carmen's body. Her remains were found in plastic containers in a makeshift grave on Wyrie Ridge, and an autopsy revealed that she had died from multiple head injuries, including a fatal blow that caused a compressed skull fracture. After forensic examinations, Carmen's body was returned to her family for burial. A private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center on October 13th to honor Carmen, a young mother known for her cheerful, kind, and successful nature. Her son, little Jack, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket, having waited and hoped to see and hug his mother. The first court hearing for Carmen's case took place on February 8, 2011. Judge Venning found the crime to be unintentional, taking into account Brad's claim that he acted in a fit of rage. While Judge Venning acknowledged this, he was less lenient when it came to Brad's attempted cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was charged with attempting to obstruct justice. According to the police investigation, on July 29, 2010, Callahan fatally struck Carmen Thomas multiple times in the head. He then sent a text message to a friend asking for 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. Subsequently, Callahan dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to dispose of it. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held, and police officers involved in the case filled the Auckland High Court. Unexpectedly, Brad Callahan pleaded guilty to 2 charges: murder and attempting to obstruct justice following Carmen's death. This was a reversal of his previous denial of guilt. The judge described Callahan's actions as one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, stating it was as serious as it gets. The judge also characterized the murder of Carmen Thomas as brutal, but not severe enough to warrant the harshest sentencing laws. A 33-year-old man, Brad Callahan, was sentenced to life in prison for murdering Carmen Thomas in Auckland High Court. The court was packed with Carmen's friends and family, including her parents, who had traveled from South Africa. Judge Venning condemned Callahan's attempts to cover his tracks, describing them as insufficient to bring him to justice. Callahan will serve his life sentence and 6 years for attempting to pervert the course of justice concurrently. Detective Inspector Mark Benefield stated that Callahan's actions had a devastating impact on two families and that he had effectively passed judgment on himself. Callahan's supporters left the court without commenting. Carmen's family expressed their grief and anger over her tragic loss, grateful that Callahan will be imprisoned for a long time to reflect on the harm he caused. Her mother, Teresa Scott, was left completely devastated by the incident. Detective Mark Benefield explained that the 10-week investigation into Carmen's disappearance involved hundreds of hours of police work. Early on, they suspected she was murdered and carefully gathered evidence following proper legal procedures. Benefield praised the cooperation with the defendant's employer and ongoing efforts to search the construction site for more evidence. He didn't rule out further arrests or charges related to Carmen's death. The Thomas family is devastated, saying they'll never forgive Brad for his actions. However, Carmen's stepfather, Wayne Callahan, and his attorney, Stuart Grieve, acknowledged Brad's acceptance of responsibility and won't challenge the sentence. The case raises concerns about potential biases against Carmen due to her profession, but emphasizes that the victim is not to blame and Brad's actions were inexcusable. The case has garnered significant media attention due to its rarity in New Zealand. The impact on Carmen's young son, Jack, who now lives under an assumed name, is also discussed, with the need to protect him from learning the truth about his mother's fate. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Angela Craig. The Craig family, who lived in $1 million home in the Denver suburbs, seemed like an average family with 6 kids, despite their financial struggles. However, their life took a dark turn on March 6, 2023, due to a protein shake. Angela Craig, a loving mother of 6, died suddenly on March 18, 2023, leaving her family in shock. Her husband James Craig's web of lies soon unraveled, revealing a sinister plot he had conceived to murder her. As the investigation progressed, the Craig family was appalled to discover one disturbing revelation after another, turning their seemingly normal life into a living nightmare. Angela Craig was pronounced brain dead at 4:29 p.m., but the reason behind her sudden death remained a mystery. Despite being perfectly healthy beforehand, her condition rapidly deteriorated, leaving doctors baffled. Her organs began shutting down, and it was unclear how someone who was formerly healthy and active, even taking trips to visit family members, could decline so quickly. Aurora, a charming eastern suburb of Denver, Colorado, is renowned for its outdoor activities, excellent schools, and pleasant atmosphere. The Craig family, consisting of James, Angela, and their 6 children, Oliver, Mira, Belle, Violet, Nora, and Cleo, called this town home. James and Angela, who married in 1999 when they were 20 and 21 years old, were deeply in love and eager to start a family. Originally from Dodge City, Kansas, they relocated to Denver after James completed dental school and taught at UMKC. James eventually started practicing at Summerbrook Dental, where Angela would occasionally lend a hand. Summerbrook Dental became the top choice in the region. Beyond dentistry, the Craigs were active in the LDS and Mormon Church, where Angela took on various roles, including teacher, choir director, youth organization leader, and family history consultant. Her favorite role was as a family history consultant, helping families uncover their history and perform temple ordinances on their behalf. All 6 of their children grew up and were baptized in the church, participating in all the activities. Everything seemed perfect in their lives, but appearances were deceiving. In 2019, James earned around $800,000, and they lived in a paid-off $1 million home. However, that same year, he took out loans of $675,000 and $242,000 against their house. Despite his income, the family faced financial struggles. James had taken out these loans to fix things, but they backfired. He ended up owing $315,000 to the IRS, had $200,000 in credit card debt, and over $750,000 in other debts, including poor cryptocurrency investments. The following year, his total debt ballooned to $2.2 million, forcing him to file for bankruptcy in 2022. Summerbrook Dental, where James worked, started having financial troubles and wasn't interested in keeping him employed. James realized he would have to declare bankruptcy again. But then his dental school friend Ryan intervened. Ryan bought Summerbrook Dental and officially became James's business partner. Although James and Ryan, along with their families, had always been extremely close, James began relying on Ryan for emotional support more than ever before in 2020. On March 6, 2023, James and Angela woke up early to exercise and each had a protein shake. Later that morning, Angela texted James, saying she wasn't feeling well and asked if he had added extra vitamins to her shake, as she was feeling dizzy. James replied that he had added a full scoop of caffeine and a large scoop of B vitamins, and mentioned that he was feeling a bit shaky too. Angela responded that she only takes a small scoop of B vitamins. As they continued to talk, Angela told James she felt as if she had been drugged. James replied that, given their history, he knew that must be triggering, and clarified that he didn't drug her. He also expressed that he was super worried and mentioned that she looked really pale before he left, particularly in her lips. After numerous tests, Angela's symptoms persisted, and she was eventually admitted to Parker Adventist Hospital. Despite the hospital's efforts, the medical professionals couldn't identify the cause of her condition, and she was sent home the same day. The next morning, James offered to take the day off from the dental clinic, but Angela, aware of their financial situation, told him to go to work, saying everything would be okay. Both Angela and James kept texting each other throughout the day. Angela thought it might be just an illness and said she would contact her primary care doctor later that day. She also sent a message saying, "I'm thinking maybe I had a sinus infection that I got used to, which then turned into an inner ear infection, and that's why it seemed to come on so suddenly." As they continued talking, Angela told James she had passed out in the kitchen earlier that day, and all she remembered was their daughter Violet screaming. James advised Angela to call 911, but she refused. James then talked to Matt about Angela's condition, and Matt thought her symptoms matched those of diabetes. Matt recommended that Angela see a new doctor as soon as possible, as she might be a newly diagnosed diabetic. However, Angela instead made an appointment with her own doctor. She even texted James, telling him not to mention diabetes and saying that she had told Matt to mind his own business. Angela scheduled an appointment for Friday, March 10th, but rescheduled for Thursday to see the doctor sooner. On the 7th, she and her husband spent the evening watching TV and cuddling, hoping for a better day ahead. The day after fainting in the kitchen, Angela began to feel better on March 8th, still oblivious to the sinister plan her husband had set in motion. However, her brief improvement was short-lived, as she started experiencing cold, fatigue, shakiness, weakness, and dizziness the following day. On March 9th, a family friend brought a glucometer to their home, and Angela's initial reading was 179. However, her levels later dropped to 140 later that day. As her symptoms persisted, she was eventually admitted to the hospital. After hearing about Angela's condition, James texted her, "Man, baby, you've got to stop scaring me like this. I love you so much, and I'm not used to all of this excitement." His words could be interpreted as either an attempt to reassure Angela and lighten the mood, or as a sarcastic response, given that his plan seemed to be working. That same day, James and Andre exchanged texts on various topics, including church, the kids, and family matters. Over the next 5 days, doctors conducted a series of tests to determine the cause of Angela's condition. The test results suggested that her symptoms were mainly related to blood pressure and vomiting. During this time, family members and friends rallied around Angela, helping with childcare, providing meals, and offering emotional support. James also sought advice from Michelle, Ryan's wife, who held a PhD in nursing and was a professor. She, too, was trying to understand what was happening to Angela, although she was unaware of James' plan, which he had set in motion on March 10th. James confided in Michelle that the uncertainty was taking a toll on him. He shared that Angela's blood pressure was a significant concern, having recently spiked to 100/60 from a previous reading of 56/44. The doctors, he said, intended to keep her under observation for another night. Notably, James expressed concern for Angela's emotional well-being, but this might have been a ploy to garner sympathy in the coming days, considering his suspected intentions. Despite his questionable motives, James demonstrated remarkable care towards Angela and the children, doing everything in his power to support them through this difficult time. On one hospital visit, he even apologized to Angela for not bringing flowers. However, this gesture could have been part of his calculated plan, aimed at deflecting suspicion from his ultimate goals. Angela remained in the hospital until March 14th, but despite the doctor's efforts, they were unable to determine the cause of her condition. She was eventually sent home with an oxygen tank and instructed to use it full-time. Upon her return, Angela jokingly texted James, saying she had become an old lady who needed an oxygen tank. The family, including the children, hoped that her return would mark the end of their trauma. Although the Craig family still lacked a diagnosis, Angela appeared to be improving. She felt stable and was no longer vomiting. However, this glimmer of hope was short-lived. On the morning of March 5th, around 11 a.m., Angela's brother rushed her back to the University of Colorado Hospital's emergency room. At this point, everyone desperately sought answers, unaware of the shocking act James had committed to cause Angela's condition. James arrived at the hospital shortly after Angela was admitted. She complained of a severe headache and dizziness. A few hours later, around 2 p.m., Angela had a seizure and her condition rapidly deteriorated. The doctors' attempts to intubate her failed, and she began to experience intracranial pressure, which affected the blood flow to her brain. Additionally, her pupils became unresponsive. Given the severity of her condition, she was transferred to the intensive care unit, ICU, and the doctors warned that her situation was dire. As James was updating Michelle on Angela's condition, sending her 2 photos and warning that her blood pressure had dropped to 55/44 and her oxygen saturation level to 84, he also mentioned that the doctors were concerned she wasn't mentally responsive as expected. Michelle and Ryan immediately rushed to the hospital to offer support, unaware that James's message would ultimately expose him. On his way to the hospital, Ryan received a call from Jacqueline, the office manager at Summerbrook Dental. She informed him that James had returned to the office after hours on March 6th, and Caitlin, another employee, had seen him using a computer in exam room 9 with the lights off. Although this might have seemed like a routine office matter, James had no reason to use that computer since he had one in his own office and often brought his laptop to work. What raised suspicions was that after leaving the office, James told Caitlin he was expecting a personal package and instructed her not to open it. On March 13th, a package arrived at the office and was opened by an unsuspecting employee who was not aware it was a personal item. The package contained a foil square with a biohazard warning and a slip with the label potassium cyanide. The employee resealed the package and handed it over to James. When Caitlin learned about Angela's condition, her suspicions were aroused and she discussed it with Jacqueline. Her suspicions were fueled by the fact that Angela's symptoms, nausea, low blood pressure, and vomiting, were similar to those Caitlin had previously experienced due to potassium cyanide poisoning. Caitlin also recalled that James had told Angela he wanted a divorce and that both were having relationship problems. She knew that James had a history of addiction to porn since his teenage years, had gambling issues, and had been involved in multiple affairs. Ryan and Michelle arrived at the hospital, each coming separately, and they spoke with James. Afterwards, Ryan approached one of the nurses and shared all the information he had gathered from Jacqueline, including his suspicion that Angela's husband might have poisoned her. Later, Ryan got a call from James, who confessed to leaking information about a package. James initially claimed the package held an engagement ring for Angela, but Ryan was skeptical and confronted him. Under pressure, James changed his story, alleging that Angela had requested he order the potassium cyanide. The autopsy and toxicology reports revealed that Angela had a toxic mix of 3 substances in her bloodstream: potassium cyanide, arsenic, and tetrahydrazine. The authorities ruled her death as a homicide, and James Craig was subsequently taken into custody, charged with first-degree murder. The police investigation into James's involvement in Angela's death included executing search warrants at his home, dental office, and personal devices. Authorities also conducted individual interviews with James and his children. Furthermore, a child protective services worker reached out to the family, during which James revealed that Angela had previously considered suicide and that he had intervened in several instances to prevent her from harming herself. James also disclosed that he had requested a divorce in December 2022, which seemed to exacerbate Angela's depression. Notably, James mentioned that Angela had overdosed on opioids, information that the caseworker was obligated to report, and speculated that her toxicology reports would reveal unusual findings. However, when questioned separately, James's children did not corroborate these claims. The eldest child, aged 20, would likely have been aware of Angela's struggles with depression and suicide attempts, yet James never sought medical or psychiatric help for her. James sent a message to Ryan expressing his disappointment that Ryan had involved the authorities. James suggested that if Ryan truly cared about him, he wouldn't have spoken to the police unless absolutely necessary. The message read, "I understand why you made that choice, but if you had approached me personally, we could have had an honest conversation. I might have shared some details that would have prevented this whole ordeal. Instead, you prioritized others' opinions and gossip over our relationship, which makes me extremely angry." The police also found text message conversations between James and his partner, Angela. In one conversation, James asked Angela not to discuss their issues with her sister. This conversation took place on March 1st, while Angela was visiting Utah. After contacting Angela's sister, Tony, the police discovered that James had drugged Angela 5 or 6 years prior. According to James, he did this to prevent Angela from intervening, as he intended to give himself a fatal injection. However, no evidence was found to suggest that James had actually attempted suicide. The police subsequently interviewed the office manager at Summerbrook Dental, who relayed the story about Exam Room 9 and the personal package. The authorities then examined the computer in Exam Room 9, reviewing its search history and hard drive. On the computer, they found a Gmail account linked to James, which revealed disturbing search queries. These included, how many grams of pure arsenic are needed to kill a human? Is arsenic detectable in an autopsy? And poisons that are undetectable and show no signs of foul play. Further investigation revealed that the same Gmail account was used to purchase arsenic metal from Amazon and potassium cyanide from Sigma, specifically the product labeled 2007-81-0225G. In addition to other evidence, the police discovered records of personal communications between James and an orthodontist he had met at a conference. The two had started dating and discussed their own experiences with lengthy divorces. The woman, who cooperated with the police investigation, also flew to Colorado twice. She stated that their relationship was not serious and that she would not have dated James if she had known he was still married and living with his wife. Experts believe that the protein shakes Angela consumed were poisoned and that she was given small doses before receiving a fatal one. As of now, James has not entered a plea and has been assigned a public defender. His trial is scheduled to begin on August 8, 2024. One possible motive for the murder could be financial gain, as James is $2.2 million in debt and was the beneficiary of 3 life insurance policies held by Angela. Whether the motive was indeed money or an extramarital affair remains to be determined during the trial.